Chapter 125. In the dream hall of the imperial palace, imperial concubine Chen reclined on the couch, but she no longer had her usual leisurely and otherworldly appearance. Her multicolored silk thread was thrown to the side halfway through. The complicated silk threads intertwined with each other, making one feel disgusted just by looking at it. "Old Chen, how is father?" Imperial consort Chen pressed her forehead. Chen Gonggang lowered his head. "Senior Duke. Not very good. Recently, the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War have been thinking of ways to oppose him. Senior Duke is also very angry." Imperial consort Chen accidentally broke a snow jade porcelain bottle in front of her. "Zhao Guang, that old man." Recently, Minister Chen's work had not gone smoothly. Even if one thought with their toes, they would know that it was Zhao Guang's doing. The Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of War had some friendship with the General Fu. In particular, there were a few stubborn old men who loved to oppose the Chen family. These past few days, they had been so obviously provocative. They must have been instructed by Zhao Guang. Chen Gonggang frowned. He did not dare to agree with Imperial consort Chen's thoughts. He hesitated and said, "In this servant's opinion, it may not be the General Fu who did it." "Oh." Imperial consort Chen glanced at him. Apart from them, who else in the court would dare to so brazenly cause trouble for the Chen family? Only that group of stubborn martial artists in the General Fu would oppose the House of Duke. They did not think about it. In the future, the world would belong to her son. If she wanted to crush the General Fu, it would be as simple as crushing an ant. The General Fu's actions have always been direct and reckless. They lack consideration. According to Senior Duke's words, these few incidents have been swift and aggressive. Right now, her ladyship is only suspicious but unable to do anything. The people of the General Fu would not be so scheming. This servant boldly guesses that it was His Highness Jinying Wang who did it. Chen Gonggang analyzed. Jinying Wang. Imperial consort Chen's voice suddenly became sharper. She was not as gentle and graceful as usual. She unconsciously became agitated. "Impossible." After a while, she said, "Jinying Wang has always been neutral in the court. Why would he oppose the Chen family for no reason?" Chen Gonggang sighed. Was Jinying Wang really neutral? He had struggled in the palace for so many years, but Imperial consort Chen was still a woman. If a woman wanted to understand the situation of the court, she would be at a disadvantage. Although Xiao Xiao had received the title of rebel and traitor, the emperor's regard for Xiao Xiao was not like how he would treat a surviving rebel. Although they did not know why, Xiao Xiao seemed to be outside of the imperial court all these years and did not side with them. In reality, his power was unfathomable. Who could know what he was thinking? In the past few days, it seemed that Xiao Xiao was very concerned about the eldest daughter of the Jiang family. Since Imperial consort Chen had taken action and Xiao Xiao had ordered people to deliver Xian Yu's head, it was clear that he wanted to protect Jiang Yuan. In that case, by suppressing the Chen family, wasn't he helping Hong and Commandery Princess vent her anger? What Chen Gonggang could think of, Imperial concubine Chen could also think of. After a while, she gradually calmed down. Whenever she thought of how Xiao Xiao had made a move against the Chen family for Jiang Yuan, an inexplicable sense of melancholy arose in her heart. In a fierce voice, she said, "What a good Jiang Yuan, to actually provoke Jinying Wang to treat her differently." Chen Gonggang lowered his head and did not speak. In the palace, Imperial consort Chen could be considered to have hidden her thoughts very deeply. As a close eunuch, Chen Gonggang was also aware of her hidden thoughts. Ever since she knew that Xiao Xiao and Jiang Ruan's relationship was not shallow, Imperial consort Chen often lost her composure. This was not a good thing for her. He had the intention to remind her, but Imperial consort Chen had always been a person with her own ideas and would not listen to his words. At this moment, the person who had caused the people of Contemplation Palace to lose their composure was staying in a corner of the palace. In the palace, there were people with ulterior motives everywhere. In her previous life, Jiang Ruan had already experienced this. In this life, she had become a Junju, and those concubines who had always trampled on her had to flatter her when they saw her. Jiang Ruan herself did not care much about these things. She only felt that everyone in the Jiangfu was ugly and the palace was full of murderous intentions. It was very difficult to find a quiet place. The Empress Dowager knew that Jiang Ruan liked peace and quiet, so she tidied up the side palace hall where Princess Yuanrong had stayed before leaving the Fu and let Jiang Ruan move in. This was also convenient. Moreover, Empress Dowager Ida's actions caused the people in the palace to ponder even more deeply. They thought that the current Hong and Junju really had a lot of face in front of the Empress Dowager. After Jiang Ruan moved in, the things inside did not change in the slightest. The original appearance was still the same as it was now. Although Empress Dowager Ida looked cold and cheerless, in her heart, she had never forgotten about her daughter who had died young. Even after so many years, things were still as clean as new. Lu Zhu and Tianzhu stayed by her side to serve her. After Tianzhu's injuries had healed, she practiced martial arts more diligently every day. She also carried a large hidden weapon with her to guard against unexpected incidents. Lu Zhu went out early in the morning to pick flowers, but returned not long after. Tianzhu felt strange and asked, "Where are the flowers?" Lu Zhu's hands were empty, so she scratched her head and stammered, "Flowers. Flower, miss, Xiao Wangye is here." Jiang Ruan almost spat out a mouthful of tea. Sure enough, she saw a figure flash behind Lu Zhu. Black embroidered clothes and a silver belt, who else could it be but Xiao Xiao? Tianzhu was also startled. Lu Zhu touched her nose and said very ashamed, "Miss, this servant was unable to stop him." With Lu Zhu's little ability, it was indeed a fantasy story for her to stop a person like Xiao Xiao. Jiang Ruan put down the book in her hand and said, "I know." Lu Zhu winked at Tianzhu. Tianzhu hurriedly said, "This servant will withdraw first." Without waiting for Jiang Ruan to speak, she left with Lu Zhu. As the door was closed, Jiang Ruan glared at the two servant girls who left without hesitation. Her heart was filled with anger. These two people were increasingly looking down on her, their mistress, more and more. Her gaze fell on the handsome youth in front of her. Was this person crazy? Entering the palace so boldly, so what if he was seen? Moreover, now that a man and a woman were sharing a room, he could come and go more and more freely. Xiao Xiao did not see Jiang Ruan's expression. He walked to the small table and sat down. After a pause, he took out a bag from his bosom and put it on the table. "What is it?" "Ointment." Xiao Xiao said, "The jade muscle ointment is gone. Applying this herbal medicine will not leave a scar." Jiang Ruan was stunned. She had not thought that he had specially come to deliver the ointment. For a moment, she did not know what to say. Xiao Xiao frowned without batting an eyelid. In fact, he had not come to deliver the ointment. He had only listened to Jin San's words and did not know why he had come here. Fortunately, he did not see Lu Min, which made his mood a little better. After a moment of silence, he said, "The selection of the new beauties is about to begin. Jiang Quan has prepared a portrait of Jiang Dan." Thinking of the spy who had returned and reported what Jiang Quan had said in the Fu, Xiao Xiao felt a chill run down his spine. Jiang Quan had said that if Jiang Ruan was not already a Junju, she would have been the best candidate to enter the palace. The emperor had clearly indicated that the Jiang family had to produce a candidate for the selection. Jiang Su Su was his most beloved daughter, so he could not allow her to suffer. Moreover, Jiang Li and Jiang Dan were Shu daughters. Since Jiang Ruan held the title of Di daughter, the Jiang Fu had raised her for so many years. Who knew that heaven's will was unpredictable? Now that Jiang Ruan was a Junju, she could no longer enter the palace. Jiang Su Su's reputation had been tarnished. Even if he was willing, the imperial family would not allow such a slap in the face. Jiang Li was already married. No matter how he thought about it, only Jiang Dan could be of use. He had no choice but to hand over Jiang Dan's portrait. Xiao Xiao frowned. He knew that Jiang Ruan's days in the Jiangfu were not easy. Otherwise, how could she have been sent to the rural residence right after the death of her mother? But he had never thought that Jiang Quan would be so ruthless. How could he treat his own daughter? Jiang Ruan said, "Fourth younger sister is going to enter the palace." That's good. With fourth younger sister's ability, you will be able to find a good future in the palace. Jiang Dan was a person who was used to being subservient. She was also vicious and merciless. She appeared to be completely innocent, but in reality, she was the most hateful. Such a person was most suited to survive in the palace. A smile appeared on Jiang Ruan's face. Jiang Quan had personally released a wolf cub, but he did not know that there would be a time in the future when it would be bitten to death by a vicious wolf. Xiao Xiao glanced at her and said, "Now that Chen Fei sees you as a thorn in her side, I will leave Jean Eyre and Jean San by your side." Jiang Ruan was stunned. To tell the truth, this was undoubtedly very tempting. After the previous incident, she had already considered it. Although on the surface, it seemed that she had the upper hand, her status could not contend with Chen Fei. Moreover, she did not have anyone to rely on, nor did she have the ability to deploy troops. If she were to use force, she might not necessarily be able to gain any advantage. One person from Tianzhu would inevitably not be enough. If there were Jean Eyre and Jean San, at least if something happened, they could think of a way to pass on the news. This would also be a form of insurance. She owed Xiao Xiao too many favors. Jiang Ruan hesitated and said, "I have a question to ask you." Xiao Xiao looked at her with some doubt in his eyes. "At that time, you said that you owed me a life. What did you mean?" Jiang Ruan asked. Xiao Xiao stared blankly and pursed his lips unnaturally. A trace of redness crept onto his face, and his cold and stiff expression also revealed a rare hint of awkwardness. Originally, it was nothing, but now that Jiang Ruan had said this, he did not know what to say. "Forget it." Just as he was about to speak, Jiang Ruan's voice sounded, "Now is not the time to pursue this matter." "Thank you very much, Xiao Xiao." She had always called him Xiao Wangye left and Xiao Wangye right, but now she no longer called him by that jerky and alienating title, and directly called him Xiao Xiao. This should have been unreasonable and could even be called presumptuous. However, Xiao Xiao inexplicably had a strange feeling in his heart. It was as if a small stone had been thrown into a tranquil deep pool, causing slight ripples. He had never thought that these two words from her mouth would have a different feeling from hearing it from someone else's mouth. Jiang Ruan saw that he did not speak and raised her eyes to look at him. Coincidentally, she saw a trace of a smile flash across those cold, star-like eyes. Stunned, she asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Xiao Xiao was in a good mood. After thinking for a bit, he took out a bracelet from his bosom and handed it to her. The bracelet emitted a faint blue light. It was the blood moon bracelet from before. Xiao Xiao explained, "There are new needles inside, and it has been tempered with poison." He was so thoughtful. Jiang Ruan took it and looked at it carefully. It would seem superfluous to say thank you, so she directly put it on her wrist. Xiao Xiao lowered his eyes. In reality, there was not much he could do for Jiang Ruan. If the embroidered uniform guards were dispatched, there would inevitably be deaths. He was not willing to get entangled with the court. If he really made a move, he would certainly hit the target, and the entire Chen family would lose their lives. He could kill people, but Jiang Ruan might not like it. There was too much darkness in her eyes. Only by killing her enemies with her own hands could she use fresh blood to wash away that darkness. Outside the door, Lu Zhu widened her eyes in shock. "Xiao Wangye sent you to protect Miss." Jean Eyre crossed his arms and looked at Lu Zhu calmly. "Yes, little girl. In the future, we will have fun." Heaven knew that ever since the last time Lu Zhu had unhesitatingly kicked his family jewels, he had been brooding over it. Xiao Xiao had originally asked Jin 1 and Jin 3 to protect Jiang Yuan, but he had taken the initiative to ask for a change of mission. Wasn't it to avenge that kick? Dewdrop spat, shameless. Why would Xiao Wangye send a pretty boy like you to protect Miss? Is it good enough that you can protect your family jewels? And you still want to protect Miss? Dream on. Jean Eyre almost spat out a mouthful of blood. He was a dignified embroidered uniform guard with an elegant demeanor. Unexpectedly, he had been called a pretty boy by a little girl. This girl had such a sharp tongue. She was much more shrewish than the female secret guards of the embroidered uniform guards. She was like a little hoodlum in the marketplace. His expression changed and he suddenly lowered his head to approach Lu Zhu. With an evil smile, he said, "So what if I'm a pretty boy? At least I'm much better than a bean sprout like you." Jean Eyre was not bad in the first place, and Lu Zhu was only a young girl in her teens. When she saw Jean Eyre's approaching smile, she blushed a little. When she suddenly heard his words, she was so angry that her nose almost became crooked. Without hesitation, she kicked him again. However, this time, Jean Eyre was already prepared. He grabbed her leg and said, "Little girl, don't be so rude. Be careful that you won't be able to marry in the future. Get lost." Lecher. Lu Zhu was so angry that she swung her hand to slap him. Jean Eyre only grabbed Lu Zhu's leg. He didn't expect that a woman's mind would always be unfathomable. That slap landed squarely on his face. The little head of the embroidered uniform guards had been slapped in the face by a maidservant who didn't know any martial arts. It was an extraordinary shame and humiliation. Jean Eyre was also exasperated. Who's the lecher? Even if someone wants to ascend the throne, it won't be you. I don't fancy that small body of yours that looks like a stick of firewood. Jean San and Tian Zhu stood on one side. Tian Zhu was naturally calm while Jean San was overjoyed. He flipped his long hair and his charming eyes were filled with the expression of someone watching a good show. TSK, the maidservant by young Madame's side is truly extraordinary. It's rare to see Jean Eyre being humiliated like this. Jean C should come and watch as well. She rolled her eyes and thought to herself, it feels like spring has arrived for the entire embroidered uniform guards with young Madame's arrival. In contrast to the relaxed and cheerful atmosphere in this corner of the palace, there were other places that were gloomy. For example, the physician's residence. In a room in the courtyard, Jiang Li sat quietly on a chair. The maidservant beside her placed the medicine in her hands on the table and twisted her waist as she said, "Madam, it's time to take your medicine." The maidservant was dressed in a peach-pink robe. Her waist was not slender and her makeup was exquisite, making her look even more delicate. Her attitude was not very respectful and all 10 of her fingers were smeared with red nail polish. She placed the medicine bowl on the table and glanced at the person on the bed. She said in a coquettish voice, "Madam, it's better to take your medicine as soon as possible so that I don't have to worry when I look back." Jiang Li strenuously looked at her and said in a hoarse voice, "Get out of here." The maidservant rolled her eyes at her and bowed disrespectfully before leaving. Before she left, she said in a small voice, "Who does she think she is? Does she really think that she's the mistress of the physician's residence? She's just a used shoe." That voice traveled faintly into Jiang Li's ears. Jiang Li was so angry that she threw the medicine bowl in her hands onto the ground. Slut! That maidservant was the maidservant she had brought from the Jiangfu as a dowry. Who knew that such a thing would happen after just a few days of marriage? Zhujiang hated her and this personal maidservant took the opportunity to climb into Zhujiang's bed. If she was not pregnant, Zhujiang would have immediately made her his concubine. Now that she was pregnant, Jiang Li let out a bitter laugh. Her gaze fell on the bowl of medicine that had been smashed on the floor. It should have been a great thing for her to be pregnant not long after she entered the residence. However, it just had to happen after that incident. She did not know whether the child in her belly was Zhujiang's or the third Prince Xian Yu's. Whether it was Zhujiang's or Xian Yu's, she did not dare to abort it. She had to protect the seed in her belly. The imperial family could not be provoked, and the people of the Zhuo Fu knew this very well. They fed her the medicine, but wantonly humiliated her. Old Madame Zhuo wished that she could die immediately and ruin Zhujiang's future and reputation. Zhujiang, needless to say, looked at her every day as if she was his enemy. That man was the devil. He looked gentle and refined, but he used all kinds of tricks to torture her. Jiang Li smiled bitterly. How did it become like this? It shouldn't be like this. She struggled to find the bronze mirror beside her pillow. The person in the mirror looked haggard. She was clearly a young girl, but she looked like an old woman of 30. Her skin was yellow and dull, and she was so thin that she was out of shape. Her eyes were dim, and they were embedded in her bony face. She looked disgusting at first glance, and there was no trace of her former beauty. She threw the bronze mirror on the ground in disgust and began to cry. She had thought that after marrying into the doctor's residence, she would become an official's wife and step on everyone else. From then on, she would completely get rid of her status as a concubine's daughter. Who knew that today, a maidservant could bully her? It shouldn't be like this. This should have been Jiang Dan's life. Jiang Li curled her body into a ball. If she had not snatched Jiang Dan's marriage, the person who would be married into the doctor's residence would be Jiang Dan. The person who would be ravaged like this would be Jiang Dan. She thought that she had snatched a happy marriage, but who knew that it was the road to the Yellow Springs? She hated Jiang Dan, hated Zhujiang, hated Xian Yu, hated her personal maidservant, and hated Jiang Ruan, who had caused everything that had happened today. Now, giving birth to a child would mean death. Moreover, she did not want to give birth to this vile spawn that represented humiliation. Jiang Li's eyes glowed with a fanatical light. If she died, the child in her belly would also die. The imperial family would certainly not let the doctor's residence off, and Zhujiang would not be able to raise his head. If that was the case, it would be much better than now. At least she could make the doctor's residence unhappy, and make Zhujiang unhappy. She felt a trace of satisfaction in her heart. She rolled off the bed and shakily picked up the broken pieces of porcelain. She muttered, "If there is an afterlife, I will definitely not let you off." Later, she was given the cold shoulder, and when the other concubines came to trample on her, only Beauty Wang comforted her every day. She also used to regard Beauty Wang as a trustworthy person until one day, when Pei was seriously ill. She went to ask for an imperial physician to treat him, but inadvertently heard Beauty Wang instruct the imperial physician to ignore her. It turned out that Beauty Wang saw that she was beautiful and was afraid that one day, she would gain the upper hand. People in the palace were used to stepping on the weak and flattering the strong. On the surface, Beauty Wang acted like a close sister, but behind her back, she did not hesitate to stab her with a knife. She just did not know what happened to her in her previous life. But now, looking at this person who she once thought she could trust, she felt that every move was a shoddy act. At first glance, she felt disgusted and did not even have the mood to play along. In the end, Beauty Wang was also considered a character in the palace. When had she ever suffered such a cold face for no reason? Seeing Jiang Ruan's indifferent appearance, she secretly resented her, but did not continue to humiliate herself. She stood up and said, "Now that the clothes have been delivered, Junzhu should at least take a look. If there is anything wrong, when you return, let the people in the CE Palace Hall change it." "No need," Jiang Ruan smiled, "I trust the clothes that Beauty Wang personally handled." These words were nothing, but Beauty Wang felt that there seemed to be a special meaning in those words. Subconsciously, she looked at Jiang Ruan and met Jiang Ruan's bright eyes. There seemed to be a hint of mockery in those eyes, which startled Beauty Wang. She quickly turned her head away and hurriedly said, "If that's the case, then this concubine will take her leave first." Jiang Wan glanced at her lightly and did not get up to send her off. She only instructed Du send Beauty Wang off. After Beauty Wang left, Jiang Wan opened the small wooden box on the table and picked up a palace satin plain white silk dress from inside. When the imperial astronomer performed rituals, the clothes were divided into several grades according to their grade, and they could not be made too brightly colored. This dress was plain and clean. If Jiang Su saw it, she would definitely like it very much, because it made her, a little white flower, look even more lovely and moving, elegant and refined. As for Jiang Wan, she threw the dress to Tianzhu. Is there anything wrong with it? Tianzhu put the dress under her nose and sniffed it. She frowned slightly and pondered for a while. Then, she walked to the side and picked up an oil lamp, lighting it with a match. Then, she took the dress and put it on the oil lamp to smoke it for a while. After a while, a trace of red gradually appeared on the snow-white dress. There was more and more red, like blood seeping out from the fabric. The more one looked at it, the more frightening it became. Jiang Wan was not surprised and only asked, "What is this?" By Luo Xiang. "The hotter it is, the redder it becomes," Tianzhu said coldly. Jiang Wan nodded in understanding. When the imperial astronomer performed rituals, it was inevitable that there would be some incense. Once the Bai Luo Xiang was lit in the main hall, and her dress had such a blood-red color, she would definitely be locked up as an evildoer. The ending could be imagined. It had to be said that this kind of thing was extremely sinister. The emperor had always attached importance to such things. If he made a fuss about this matter, he could indeed put her to death. If someone like Tianzhu was not by her side, she would definitely not have discovered the problem. Tianzhu asked, "Master, do you want to change it?" "There is no need to beat the grass and startle the snake," Jiang Wan said indifferently. "This dress is so valuable, it cannot be wasted. Since others have sent such a good gift, it is only natural that we return the favor." She smiled coldly. "I also want to see who will emerge as the winner of this ritual." After Beauty Wang left, she first returned to her own small building. After resting for a while, she pretended to unintentionally wander to the Hall of Dreams. The palace maids of the Hall of Dreams welcomed her in. When Beauty Wang entered the hall, Imperial Consort Chen was leaning on a soft woolen couch and tying her hair. Beauty Wang had always been curious as to why Imperial Consort Chen, who was in such a high position, still tied her hair like an ordinary woman. Now, it seemed that she somewhat understood why the emperor favored Imperial Consort Chen. It was because any man who entered the Hall of Dreams would see a woman who was like an ordinary young married woman, gently tying her hair. It was as if all worries and troubles had gone far away, leaving only the tranquility and elegance of this corner of Jiangnan. However, a trace of ridicule flashed in Beauty Wang's eyes. The woman in a man's eyes and the woman in a woman's eyes were naturally different. The imperial consort Chen that the emperor saw was gentle, elegant, graceful, and aloof from worldly affairs. However, the imperial consort Chen in Beauty Wang's eyes was brimming with ambition and extremely frightening. "You've come, sit." Imperial consort Chen smiled and pointed to the seat next to her, looking very amiable. "Qiashin does not dare." Beauty Wang also smiled and only said, "The clothes have already been sent over." Oh, Imperial Consort Chen did not even raise her head and continued to seriously tie her hair, her 10 fingers flying in the silk thread. "What do you think of Hong and Junzhu?" After Lu Zhu helped her freshen up, she followed the young eunuch who led the way to the celestial observatory platform. Jiang Wan followed behind the palace women. Although her relationship with the Empress Dowager was not shallow, the women in the palace still faintly isolated her. On the other hand, Princess Rongya and Shu Fei's daughter, Princess Yi, were high and aloof. They were surrounded by a group of imperial concubines and spoke to them like pearls in the palm. At the forefront of the womenfolk were Empress Dowager Yi De and the Empress, followed by Imperial Concubine Chen, Concubine De, Shu Fei, and Xian Fei. At the male side of the banquet were the princes and the princes, with the emperor sitting at the highest position. Empress Dowager Ida saw that Jiang Yuan was left behind by the palace women and frowned slightly. She said coldly, "Hong'an, come to Ijia." Jiang Yuan stepped forward. Princess Rongya and Princess Yi's eyes flashed with jealousy at the same time. Only then did the men seem to notice Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan walked up to Empress Dowager Ida. Empress Dowager Ida reached out to hold her hand. Such an intimate appearance shocked everyone. Although they knew that Jiang Yuan was favored, Empress Dowager Ida was cold and aloof. Such an intimate action was something that even Princess Yuanrong had rarely received. Jiang Yuan smiled. Her gaze fell on a familiar figure at the men's banquet. She could not help but be slightly startled. The black brocade robe was clearly Xiao Xiao. Only members of the imperial family could participate in the imperial astronomer's religious ceremony. Why was Xiao Xiao also here? Xiao Xiao was also stunned when he saw Jiang Yuan. Jiang Yuan was dressed in a white silk dress made of palace satin. Her jet-black hair was coiled into a gourd bun with a white jade hairpin. She did not have any ornaments, nor did she have any makeup on. Jiang Yuan had always preferred bright red clothes. Tomorrow, she would present herself in a bright and moving image. But now, she was so plain and clean, as if she had been washed clean. She was different from Jiang Su's delicate and charming appearance. Jiang Ruan's white dress actually made her gentle smile appear somewhat cold and detached. Her faintly discernible upturned eyes seemed to contain a trace of sharp mockery. If the red-clothed Jiang Yuan was said to be a red fox, then the white-clothed Jiang Yuan was like a nimble snake. The word pitiful had nothing to do with her. Instead, there was a kind of frightening coldness. A blood-red plum blossom suddenly turned into a snow-white pear blossom. Many people's gazes were already on her. Xianli was no exception. He looked at Jiang Yuan with a somewhat absent-minded gaze. He felt that this woman was so otherworldly and different from other women that he could not help but want to make her his own. It was a very beautiful thing to see that indifferent gaze infatuated with him. The emperor's eyes also flashed with a trace of amazement. However, Jiang Yuan was still too young and too cold. Men always liked a softer temperament. The emperor had never liked Jiang Yuan. On the contrary, Imperial Consort Chen looked at Jiang Yuan and revealed a faint smile. Beauty Wang also looked at Jiang Yuan from afar. She did not know why, but tonight her heart was beating very fiercely, as if she had an ominous premonition. When she saw that Jiang Yuan was indeed wearing the white silk dress made of palace satin, she was relieved. As long as she wore this dress, and the Ce Palace had not made any other dresses, today's matter was absolutely safe. Jiang Yuan slightly raised the corners of her lips. Seeing that the emperor had announced the start of the ceremony, the people of the imperial astronomer burned incense and washed their hands. Green smoke slowly rose from the huge incense burner. Hui Ju, dressed in a monk's robe, stood beside the supervisor, silently chanting scriptures with a benevolent look on his face. Ling Tai Lang was measuring the stars when he heard a dong sound. The huge tortoise shell placed at the front suddenly split open from the middle, and a sudden crack appeared on the shell. Great misfortune. The supervisor's eyes widened and he wanted to say something, but his voice was interrupted. Not good, Your Excellency. It was the registrar of the Imperial Astronomer's records. With a panicked expression, he staggered over from the observatory and said, 2 stars accompanying the moon, 2 stars accompanying the moon. Great misfortune. The emperor stood up and asked in a low voice, what happened? The registrar of the Imperial Astronomer suddenly knelt on the ground and repeatedly kowtowed, Your Majesty, 2 stars accompanying the moon, a great misfortune. What? The emperor frowned. The imperial astronomer had been performing rituals for so many years, but since he ascended the throne, this was the first time he had encountered an image of a great misfortune. After steadying himself, he said, explain clearly to me, what is two stars accompanying the moon? The supervisor seemed to have recovered from his shock and knelt down, replying to Your Majesty, two stars accompanying the moon is a great misfortune. The country's demon star is the calamity of the country's demise. Demon star. It was Imperial Consort Chen who spoke. She tilted her head in confusion. What demon star? The person who brings chaos to the country. The supervisor wiped his sweat. This person is the reincarnation of the demon star. Two stars accompanying the moon is a warning from the heavens, an omen of the country's demise. Then where is the demon star? Imperial Consort Chen seemed a little nervous. The heavens are merciful, perhaps they will send down a warning. This subject is willing to burn a joss stick and ask the heavens for their will. Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Chapter 127. Your Majesty. Imperial Consort Chen looked at the emperor. Although she did not say anything, there was some worry in her bright eyes. It was as if she was really worried about the world. The empress moved her lips and a trace of helplessness flashed across her face. She remained silent. All right, we will now watch you burn the incense. The emperor said to the supervisor. The chief supervisor lowered his head and ordered his subordinates to bring out the cherishing wishing incense. The cherishing wishing incense was made to be extremely thick, about the size of a small pillar. The emperors of the past would only burn the cherishing wishing incense to ask the heavens when they encountered a great omen. The incense was lit and the observatory was suddenly surrounded by warm smoke. The supervisor knelt down and kowtowed 3 times to the incense, saying, "The heavens bless us, the heavens send a warning. Today, there are 2 stars accompanying the moon, the demon star has appeared. May the heavens know and inform us of the demon star's location." The green eyes curled up and gradually submerged in the darkness of the night. Jiang Wan smiled and folded her hands in front of her chest. The wind gently lifted her long black hair. She was dressed in white and her face was beautiful enough to topple a city. However, she was like a beautiful evil spirit from hell, descending with hatred. Xiao Xiao's gaze fell on the kowtowing supervisor and his expression slightly paused. Suddenly, there was a cry of surprise from the crowd. Imperial Consort Chen's eyes slowly relaxed, like the overflowing spring water of Jiangnan, full of warmth and joy. "Sister Wang, why are you?" The voice gradually became louder. The smile in Imperial Consort Chen's eyes stopped. But she saw that the womenfolk were already panicking and retreated, leaving Beauty Wang alone in the middle. At this moment, her plain dress was completely red from top to bottom. It was as shocking as blood, and the color was still expanding, gradually expanding from her chest to her entire body. It was as if she had been fished out of a pool of blood. The palace attendants fled in panic, leaving only Beauty Wang to randomly pat her dress and murmur, "How can this be? No, how can this be?" Imperial Consort Chen suddenly looked down at Jiang Wan, who was beside Empress Dowager Ida. Jiang Wan seemed to sense her gaze and turned her head to look at her, revealing a slight smile. The smile was gentle and self-contained, brightening her charming face in an instant, but her eyes seemed to contain endless ridicule and provocation. Jiang Wan nodded at her. Imperial Consort Chen's body was somewhat stiff. The emperor said angrily, "Demoness. Capture her." The guards swarmed forward and subdued Beauty Wang without much effort. Beauty Wang did not expect that she would suddenly encounter such an unforeseen event. At this moment, her mind was already in a mess. After being captured, he shouted unwillingly, "Your Majesty! Your Majesty! This concubine is innocent, this concubine is innocent." Empress Shu clutched her chest and said, "What injustice! Everyone has seen the warning from the heavens. It's clearly you, the fiend star's scourge. It really scared me to death." Your Majesty, Beauty Wang knew that once she was identified as the fiend star, her fate would be tragic. Her gaze fell on Empress Dowager Ida, who was not far from the emperor. Jiang Ruan's white clothes were clean and spotless, without a trace of blood on them. What was going on? Originally, it should have been Jiang Ruan. How did it become her? Beauty Wang was suddenly enlightened. It must have been Jiang Ruan. She must have tampered with the clothes. Otherwise, how could the person in the accident have changed his height? Your Majesty, it was Hong and Junzhu who framed me. Beauty Wang gritted her teeth and said, it was Hong and Junzhu. She did something to this concubine's clothes. Your Majesty, I'm really innocent. Shut up. It was Empress Dowager Yi Da who shouted coldly, nonsense, what does it have to do with Hong En? This matter concerns Hong En's innocence. Beauty Wang must demand an explanation. Hong En is not afraid of confronting Beauty Wang. Jiang Ruan bowed to the emperor on the high seat. Imperial father, yesterday, Beauty Wang brought Ce Palace's clothes to this son's palace and this son received them. But according to Beauty Wang's words, this son framed Beauty Wang. Beauty Wang's clothes did not go through this son's hands. She looked at Beauty Wang with a smile that was not a smile and said, Hong En wants to ask Beauty Wang, how did you frame Beauty Wang? Beauty Wang's clothes have nothing to do with Hong En. From the moment they entered the observatory until now, Hong En has been keeping a distance from Beauty Wang. If Beauty Wang wants to say that you framed me, please show me the evidence. Otherwise, it will be nonsense. After a round of questioning, Beauty Wang was left speechless. Yes, she was the one who brought the clothes to Jiang Ruan and Jiang Ruan did not touch her clothes. But she did not know how, in the end, she was the one who got into trouble. Could it be? Beauty Wang suddenly looked at Imperial Consort Chen. It was her. Imperial Consort Chen saw Beauty Wang's expression clearly and called her an idiot in her heart. She looked back coldly. Beauty Wang met that pair of indifferent eyes and could not help but shiver. Her whole family still relied on Imperial Consort Chen to support them. If she angered Imperial Consort Chen, the whole Fu would not have a good life. He could only swallow this grievance in silence. It was just that it was really bitter to swallow. She knelt down and thought that since she was going to die anyway, she might as well end her own life instead of being treated as a demon and tortured to death. Suddenly, she went crazy and bit the guard who was holding her. The guard saw that she was gradually calming down and relaxed his vigilance. Caught off guard, he was bitten. Before he could stop her, Beauty Wang had already pulled out the guard's saber and slid it across her neck. No one expected that she would suddenly make such a move. A line of blood splattered and Beauty Wang's body fell softly. Her eyes were wide open, but they were looking in Jiang Ruan's direction. As a result, everyone's eyes were focused on Jiang Ruan. They only felt that Beauty Wang had died with grievances. Even if Jiang Ruan's questioning was flawless, at this moment, it was inevitable that there would be some doubts. Xiao Xiao's gaze turned cold. This was Beauty Wang's purpose. Even if she had to pay with her life, she wanted to splash a layer of dirty water on Jiang Ruan. Perhaps, Imperial Consort Chen would look after the Wang family after her death because of her dedication. The guard stepped forward to check Beauty Wang's breath and knelt down to beg for forgiveness. The emperor was furious. Firstly, he was angry that he had seen blood while observing the stars. Secondly, the appearance of a demon in the country was inauspicious. He looked at the supervisor who was already scared stiff and asked, "What should we do about this matter?" The supervisor was startled. When he regained his senses, his body could not help but tremble even more violently. Today's matter should not have turned out like this. When the so-called demon became Beauty Wang, things got out of hand. The current situation was something he had not expected and he did not know how to end it. However, he still had to put on an act, so he said in a trembling voice, "Replying to your Majesty, the demon has died. The heavens will bless the common people of the Jin dynasty." The emperor was obviously not satisfied with this answer. He looked at Hui Ju, who had been standing silently at the side, and asked, State Preceptor, what do you think? Hui Ju sighed. A look of pity appeared on his face. He slowly walked to the front of Beauty Wang's corpse. His hands caressed Beauty Wang's eyes. When he took his hands away, the eyes that were originally open in death were already closed. He silently closed his eyes, put his palms together, and seemed to be chanting a rebirth mantra. After he finished chanting, he faced the corpse and bowed, Amitabha Buddha. However, Xu Fei could not bear to see this and said in a sweet voice, although State Preceptor is merciful, how can he worship a demon? The death of such a demon is not to be pitied. Isn't State Preceptor's chanting of the rebirth mantra a disaster for the entire Jin dynasty? Shut up. The emperor was furious. He had always trusted Hui Ju, so he naturally would not refute his actions. Hui Ju sighed, turned to the emperor, and bowed, Your Majesty, this benefactor is not the demon. What do you mean? The emperor hurriedly asked. The supervisor on the ground could not help but tremble. Imperial Consort Chen, who was seated, paused and raised her eyes to look in Jiang Ruan's direction. Jiang Ruan stood quietly beside Empress Dowager Yi De. When she heard Hui Ju's words, her expression did not change, as if nothing could enter her ears. The smile on her lips seemed to be engraved, gentle and harmless, but it sent chills down one's spine. Imperial Consort Chen's heart sank, and she had a bad premonition. Hui Ju shook his head and did not speak, but the sorrow on his face deepened. Before he could finish speaking, the cry of a night owl came from the sky. Normally, there would be people sweeping and tidying up the observatory, so how could there be a night owl? Everyone was bewildered when they saw a black shadow flash across the sky. That shadow was extremely fast, and it only skimmed over everyone's heads. There were no archers on the observatory, so they could not shoot that thing down with one shot. Ah! Empress Xu screamed. That black shadow looked like a bird, and it seemed to be holding something in its claws. When it flew to the top of Imperial Consort Chen's head, it loosened its grip, and that thing fell right into Imperial Consort Chen's bosom. This was what Empress Xu was screaming about. The Empress's eyes moved slightly, and she said, "Quickly protect the Imperial Consort." The Imperial Guard hurriedly stepped forward and picked that thing out. Imperial Consort Chen was also startled, but she had always been able to endure it. She only had a slightly panicked expression on her face, but in the end, she still steadied herself and did not do anything that would cause her to lose her composure. When the Imperial Guard who had picked out the thing saw the thing on the sword, he jumped in fright and suddenly froze on the spot, not knowing what to do. When the surrounding people saw this scene, they became curious and craned their necks to see clearly what it was. When Imperial Consort Chen saw the Imperial Guard's expression, her heart sank. When she saw clearly what it was, her vision blurred, and she almost fainted. She saw that the thing on the ground was still bouncing non-stop. It was a slender body covered in scales, and it was clearly a snake. The snake's scales were grayish-yellow, and there seemed to be 4 protrusions under its body, as if it was about to grow legs. "The golden dragon has appeared," someone murmured. Imperial Consort Chen hurriedly looked at the Emperor's expression, only to see that the Emperor's face was ashen as he looked at the snake rolling on the ground, forcefully suppressing his emotions. Hui Ju's voice leisurely sounded from the observatory, "The star of the year swallows the moon, there is a great morning, the female lead kills the monarch, the position changes." It was like a proverb from the end of the world, and it sounded like a clap of thunder in everyone's ears. If the son of a demonic star wanted to fight for the throne, it was wishful thinking. If one day, a crown prince was appointed, the position of heir apparent would naturally be in the 5th prince's pocket. Not only did Xianhua think this way, but many people in the court who were hesitant, after this incident, expressed their attitudes and stood on the 5th prince's side. Even some people who were originally on Xian Li's side also sided with Xianhua after this incident. The fight for the throne was changing rapidly, and the fall of the most favored imperial consort Chen also gave the harem concubines many opportunities. Coupled with the fact that the palace was about to select new beauties, the court officials began to size up their daughters. The supervisors on the observatory, including Ling Tai Lang, were all removed from their positions due to dereliction of duty and were fined a large sum of money. This was because, as the people of the imperial astronomer, they had failed to supervise properly. On that day, if the state preceptor, Hui Ju, had not been present, there would have been chaos. After this incident, Hui Ju said that he had revealed too much of the secrets of heaven and went into seclusion in the temple. The emperor became increasingly respectful towards him, and his position unconsciously became more stable. When Lu Zhu told Jiang Yuan about these matters, she said, "In short, the people of the imperial astronomer now have only themselves to blame. This is really delightful." The people of the imperial astronomer had colluded with imperial consort Chen, and on that day, they had only wanted to throw dirty water on her. Unexpectedly, Hui Ju had appeared midway. The Bai Luo fragrance on her clothes had long been washed away by Tian Zhu. As for the perfume on Beauty Wang's body, it was given to Jean Eyre and Jean San to send as a gift. Jean Eyre and Jean San were much more capable than the imperial guards in the residence of the imperial concubines. For example, they were even more adept at this kind of private matter. Minister Chen had knelt in Jingyang Palace for an entire night. On the surface, he appeared to be respectful and pleading for mercy on behalf of imperial consort Chen, but in reality, in the eyes of the emperor, it was a blatant provocation. The Qin family had already angered the emperor. Perhaps Minister Chen had not realized it yet, but there would come a day when he would regret what he had done today. Imperial consort Chen wanted her life, but she did not want imperial consort Chen to die so early. Just like Xia Yan, as long as imperial consort Chen was alive, she would forever create a stain on Xian Li's life. Xian Li was a filial son, but she did not know whether he would be like the two Jiang siblings and kill his own mother. It was just that in the previous life, Xian Li's actions had revealed his attachment to imperial consort Chen. In this life, if he was still a filial son, he would certainly not kill his own mother. Thus, the only thing Xian Li could do was to advance his grand plan of seizing the throne. Without imperial consort Chen behind him, it was not clear whether he could act as appropriately as before. However, the current situation had suddenly changed, and Xian Li would easily make mistakes. Chapter 128. The stars in the night sky seemed to be the same as before, but the situation outside had undergone earth-shaking changes. On the surface, there seemed to be nothing going on in the palace, but in the dark, it had already turned the world upside down. Zhuo Zhang's reputation was now ruined, and his backer, imperial consort Chen, had already fallen from power. For the sake of his own reputation, Xian Li absolutely did not dare to use him again. His entire official career had been ruined by Jiang Li. When he saw the people of the Jiang Fu who had come to offer their condolences, it was difficult to conceal the anger in his eyes. Fearing that second Yin Yang would do something out of line again, Jiang Quan did not bring her along. Jiang Yuan followed behind Jiang Quan and offered incense to Jiang Li's memorial tablet in the morning hall. Zhuo Jiang, dressed in mourning clothes, looked coldly at Jiang Yuan. In Zhuo Jiang's view, Jiang Yuan must have played a part in the incident at the Langzhong Fu. If Jiang Li had humiliated him, then Jiang Yuan was the main culprit. Jiang Dan's voice was cold, and second Yin Yang seemed to come back to her senses. Jiang Dan continued, "If second Yin Yang still wants to avenge third Jijie, then you'd better listen to me obediently." Because of Xia Yan's matter, Jiang Su harbored some anger towards Jiang Quan and was no longer as respectful as before. At this moment, Jiang Quan was on the other side and did not hear Jiang Su's words. Jiang Su's words were so unrestrained, but Jiang Dan timidly smiled and said, "Second Jijie, don't tease Dan Yang." "What nonsense are you saying?" Second Yin Yang slapped the maidservant's face. "If I hear you say such treasonous words again, see if I don't tear off your mouth while you're still alive and sell you to the most despicable brothel." Yang Lu glanced worriedly at second Yin Yang. When she met Jiang Dan's eyes, she was shocked. The previously weak and incompetent fourth young mistress now had a pair of eyes that seemed to have knives in them. It made people feel cold just by looking at them, as if they were a snake waiting for its prey. Yang Lu gritted her teeth and braced herself to say, "Then I'll have to trouble fourth Mississippi." She lowered her head and ran out. The ground was covered with dust and cobwebs, and there was a smell of decay in the air. The windows of the house were not open, as if the people inside were extremely afraid of sunlight. The curtains were drawn tightly, emitting a damp stench in the summer. Now, the Jiang family only had 3 daughters left. Jiang Wan was charming, Jiang Su was elegant and pretty, and the only remaining daughter, Jiang Dan, seemed to have suddenly shed off her lowly outer shell and was reborn. Although her appearance was not as beautiful as the 2D daughters, she had a delicate and pitiful temperament. This kind of temperament could arouse a man's desire to protect her. The courtyard had always been filled with jade wares, gold and silver, but now, it was as if it had been robbed, and the shelves were completely empty. Second Yin was acting so crazily that the servant girl was so frightened that she did not care about her pain, and hurriedly said, Yin Yang, your illness is acting up again. Please drink this medicine, you will feel better after drinking it. Such a lukewarm attitude, and no anger, caused Jiang Su's eyes to flash, and she could not help but feel a sense of melancholy. Jiang Wan had always been a scheming person, and she also had the Empress Dowager and the Zhao family to rely on. Now, even Jiang Dan had become so difficult to deal with. The more she felt, the more resentful she felt. Jiang Wan, she harmed my Li, I want her to be buried with her. Second Yin clenched her fists tightly, and her eyes were practically spitting fire. Originally, she had thought that with Jiang Li married to Lang Zhong's wife, and Xia Yan banished to the Little Buddha Hall, the Jiang Fu would now be under the sole control of Second Yin. Who knew that on the day of the wedding, such a scandal would occur? Now that Jiang Li was dead, it could be said that she had completely shed all pretense of cordiality with Lang Zhong's Fu. Jiang Quan was already angry at Jiang Li's actions, and when he saw Second Yin shamelessly demanding an explanation from Lang Zhong's Fu, he was also filled with resentment. Thus, he simply put Second Yin under house arrest. The person who had come was dressed in a light yellow skirt, and her smile was quiet and shy. She said softly, I have come to console Second Yin. Jiang Wan calmly looked him in the eye. Her skills were inferior, and she was willing to admit defeat. Zhujiang had thought that he could climb the road to meteoric success, but who knew that it was merely a shortcut to hell? Second Yin finally raised her head, and fiercely glared at Jiang Dan, that should have been your end. Li died in your place. You jinx, it was you who caused Li death. Return my Li As she finished speaking, she was about to pounce on Jiang Dan with bared fangs and brandished claws. However, she had been locked up in the room for a long time, and these few days, she had become so haggard that she had lost her human form. Jiang Dan only needed to twist her body slightly to avoid her. But today, seeing Jiang Dan, his eyes could not help but brighten. He thought to himself that this was what should have been his wife. His wife should have been such a gentle and virtuous lady. The more he thought about it, the more he recalled Jiang Li's shamelessness, and the more unwilling he felt. Now, father is very angry with Second Yin. If Second Yin wants to avenge Third Jie, you cannot act rashly. Otherwise, not only will you not be able to redress Third Jie's grievances, but you will also lose your own life. Second Yin's words are very strange. Jiang Dan smiled. At that time, was it me who wanted to throw the marriage to Second Yin? No, it was father and Second Yin who thought of a way to snatch the marriage away from Dan Yang's hands. Third Jie was happy for a long time, but she did not know that the marriage that Second Yin had chosen for her would ultimately send her to the Yellow Springs. Jiang Dan sighed softly, what an injustice. When Jiang Li died, the Lang Zhong Fu did not immediately notify the Jiang Fu. Therefore, only one day after Jiang Ruan returned to the Fu, it was the day of Jiang Li's funeral. As the Lang Zhong Fu, Jiang Li's funeral was also handled by the Lang Zhong Fu. It was inevitable that some people would talk about Jiang Li's death. A wife who had lost her chastity died a few days after marrying into the family. If one were to say that Zhuo Jiang did not play a part in this, no one would believe it. The Zhuo family seemed to have considered this point, and Jiang Li's funeral was not the least bit sloppy. However, the people who came to mourn could see the displeasure on Zhuo Jiang's face. "What is it?" Second Yin Yang grabbed Jiang Dan's hand, a trace of anxiety flashing in her eyes. Jiang Dan smiled and patted her hand, speaking of which, I also did not dare to believe this matter, because, in the end, this matter is related to the Jijie. Every word of her words poked into Second Yin Yang's heart. In fact, after Jiang Dan finished speaking, Second Yin Yang believed her. It was a lie, and this lie was too flawless. More importantly, the pain of losing her daughter was something that Second Yin Yang could not bear. Jiang Li's death had been caused by her. Whenever she thought of this matter, Second Yin Yang wished that she could dig out her heart. But now, Jiang Dan's words gave Second Yin Yang an outlet to vent. To be able to vent all her hatred on Jiang Ruan, how could she not be happy? Tian Zhu noticed Jiang Ruan's small movement, and the expression in her eyes changed. She looked thoughtfully at Jiang Dan and Zhuo Jiang, and her gaze returned to confusion. However, Jiang Dan seemed to be a little afraid of Zhuo Jiang's fixed gaze. She took 2 steps back and said, "Brother-in-law." That voice did not come from the thoughtful Jiang Su Su, but from the delicate and timid Jiang Dan. The real murderer. Second Yin Yang suddenly raised her head. Second Yin Yang looked at Jiang Dan's peaceful smile and could not help but shiver. For the first time, she felt that this weak and incompetent orphan girl was so terrifying. With this kind of scheming, if she had really fought against Jiang Li would not have been her opponent. She murmured, "Why did you do this?" The servant girl lifted the bowl of medicine in her hands and said softly, "Yin Yang, it's time to take your medicine." Jiang Dan smiled lightly. Yin Yang still doesn't believe Dan Yang's words at this time, don't you think it's strange? On the day of third Jiejie's wedding, eldest Jiejie entered the palace. If not for the protection of someone in the palace, how could eldest Jiejie be so unscrupulous? If Yin Yang doesn't believe me, you can go and ask around yourself. However, it's difficult for Yin Yang to leave now, and the only person you can trust is me. However, ever since Second Yin Yang's accident, Jiang Quan had placed her under house arrest, and only Yang Lu was left to serve her. When Second Yin Yang went crazy, how could Yang Lu hold her back alone? Jiang Li's death had a huge impact on Second Yin Yang. These few days, she often acted as if she had lost her mind, and the physician only prescribed some calming prescriptions. It turned out that such a reckless and arrogant person had unexpectedly fallen to such a miserable end, which made one unable to help but sigh. Jiang Wan did not seem to hear the conversation between the two, and her aloof attitude caused Jiang Dan to look at her a few more times. Second Yin Yang's body trembled, and she howled even more painfully. However, Jiang Dan slowly said, Yin Yang is originally an intelligent person, and has always been ruthless. That's why you acted so swiftly and decisively to snatch Dan Yang's marriage fate. What, now you actually want to play the fool to escape the pain? The 2 words fourth sister were enunciated with great emphasis, as if it contained some indescribable emotion. Jiang Wan lowered her eyes, and her long eyelashes drew a demonic arc. The corners of her lips slightly curled up, and she actually smiled. Second Yin Yang was still holding her head and rolling on the bed in pain. Jiang Dan quietly walked in front of her, and lowered her head to admire her for a while before she opened her mouth to speak. Yin Yang, what is the consequence of snatching another person's marriage fate? Jiang Li looked at Second Yin Yang's sorrowful expression with satisfaction for a while before saying faintly, I can also feel Second Yin Yang's sorrow. Today, I am here to remind Second Yin Yang not to blame the wrong person and let the real murderer live freely. The servant girl's arm was in pain from second Inyang's grasp, but she did not dare to struggle free. Her eyes were red as she cautiously said, "Inyang, second miss is already dead." After many twists and turns, apart from first Inyang, who had never been involved in the affairs of the Fu, the power to take care of matters in the Fu ultimately fell into the hands of fifth Inyang, Hong Ying. The person on the bed was tightly curled up into a ball, and her hands were hugging her shoulders. Her almond-shaped eyes, which had always been somewhat arrogant, were now bloodshot, and her gaze was protruding with a kind of frenzy. Second Inyang's expression fluctuated unpredictably, as if she wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. After a long time, she squeezed out a sentence with difficulty from the gaps of her teeth. "Do you have any evidence for what you say?" If Imperial Consort Chen had not lost her power, Jiang Li's death was bound to set off even more waves. However, Imperial Consort Chen had been banished into the cold palace, and Jiang Li's death was like a small stone thrown into the vast bottom of a lake. It did not cause any waves, and just quietly sank like that. And because of Jiang Li's death, the rumors aroused among the common people were also suppressed by the rumor that Imperial Consort Chen had become a demon that would bring calamity to the country. As if she had completely awakened from her delusions, second Inyang suddenly jumped up, grabbed the servant girl, and anxiously said, "Why are you still taking medicine? Li is still being bullied in the Langzhong Fu. That wretched Zhuo family actually dared to treat Li like this. I must definitely demand an explanation for Li Zhuo Jiang then remembered that this slender and elegant young girl in front of him should have been the girl who had been engaged to him 3 years ago. At that time, he had saved a life and left a marriage predestined by fate. However, that marriage predestined by fate had led to the wrong person. At that time, both the Langzhong Fu and the Jiang Fu had agreed that it was Jiang Li, so he could only acquiesce. He had already inquired about Jiang Li's temperament and knew that Jiang Li's temper was much worse than Jiang Dan's. Originally, he had some dislike towards Jiang Li, and later on, there was a scandal. Even before Jiang Li died, she still wanted to drag the Langzhong Fu down with her. Every time he thought about it, Zhuo Jiang would have a stomach full of anger. Eldest sister was born with an outstanding beauty, and all the disciples in the capital admired her endlessly. Even His Royal Highness was no exception. On the day of third sister's and Zhuo Langzhong's wedding, His Royal Highness asked Zhuo Langzhong for a favor so that he could meet eldest sister. Originally, this was not a big deal. However, eldest sister prided herself on being a virtuous girl, and now that she was related to the imperial family, she naturally could not lose face for the imperial family. Third sister merely wanted to help brother-in-law, but did not expect that eldest sister would take her anger out on her. In a fit of anger, eldest sister caused brother-in-law and third sister to have an affair the next day. Jiang Dan spoke unhurriedly, as if she was narrating a story. When second Inyang heard this, she felt even more aggrieved. And Xianli, who had always won people over with his virtue and talent, really displayed the side of a filial son. After kneeling outside Jingyang Palace for 3 days and 3 nights, he finally fainted from exhaustion. The emperor was furious and sent him back to his fu, ordering him not to enter the palace. Jiang Wan. Second Inyang's expression changed as she said, "How could it be related to her?" Yang Lu turned around and was startled. To think that when you were first born, you were still a tiny little dumpling. Jiang Wan obeyed and walked over to sit in front of the old Jiang madam. Kai Ke poured a cup of tea for Jiang Ruan. The old Jiang madam patted Jiang Ruan's hand and said, "Wan girl, this is the newly delivered 100 fragrant hawthorn tea. The imperial concubines in the palace often drink it. You young ladies like to drink sweet things, please have a taste. Perhaps Zumo also knows, isn't that so?" Jiang Ruan said lightly. Jiang Ruan nodded. Jiang Dan beamed and said, "Zumo now thinks very highly of Dejijie. Dejijie is really enviable. Forgive Ruan Yang for being powerless." Jiang Ruan sighed, I am afraid that I will have to disappoint Zumo. Jiang Wan nodded and took her leave. Jiang Dan stood where she was and looked at Jiang Ruan's back, slowly revealing a trace of a happy smile. Jiang Dan's expression slightly froze and she looked at Jiang Ruan in distress. Dejijia, why do you want to harm Zumo? Zumo loves you so dearly and even specially invited you to the courtyard today. How can you harm her like this? She actually wanted to give Jiang Chao some advice. As for Jiang Su Su, she had now reached the age to look at other people. After all, she had grown up in front of her and the old Jiang madam still had some feelings for Jiang Su Su as a granddaughter. It was just that. Jiang Wan smiled faintly, the harem cannot interfere in politics. The Empress Dowager's kindness to Ruan Yang is a heavenly grace. How could Ruan Yang dare to control her Nyang's thoughts? As for second younger sister grew up in the capital and is more familiar with the circle of noble ladies than Ruan Yang. In comparison, second younger sister has seen more of the world than Ruan Yang. Perhaps the people of the Jiang family had a kind of innate selfishness and coldness in their bones, innately believing that everyone in the world should be used by them. The old Jiang madam was the same. She smiled faintly and said in a tone that was chilling to the bone, perhaps I should ask, if not for the Jiang family, how could my mother have died? The old Jiang madam was startled and a trace of panic appeared in her eyes. What did you say? Kai Ke looked at Jiang Wan with some uneasiness. Bai Ji and Lian Qiao, on the other hand, looked indignant. Jiang Wan stood up and looked down at the old Jiang madam. This master, who had previously been all-powerful in the Jiang Fu, was now old and frail. Such a twisted expression, coupled with the loose skin on her face, made her look somewhat comical. Jiang Dan stared blankly and her eyes flashed. When she looked at Jiang Wan again, she said meaningfully, eldest sister is used to joking. It's getting late, eldest sister should go quickly. If you are late, Zuma will punish Dan Yang again. Seeing Jiang Wan, Jiang Dan stopped and said with a smile, eldest sister. Wan girl is here, come to Zuma's side. The old Jiang madam beckoned to her affectionately. However, Jiang Dan did not show her usual aggrieved expression when she saw the old Jiang madam's cold attitude. Instead, she appeared to be in a good mood and asked, is eldest sister going to Zuma's courtyard? Heavens, second Yin Yang exclaimed exaggeratedly, even if you had a dispute with the old madam, you can't just kill the old madam. Such a treasonous thing, heavens. Kai Ke went to fill the tea leaves for Jiang Wan, leaving only Du Wan standing silently at the side. Bai Ji and Lian Qiao's expressions changed slightly. Only Jiang Wan was unmoved like a mountain, her expression unchanged as she quietly listened to the old Jiang madam's words, which seemed to be filled with remorse. Seeing her like this, the old Jiang madam's expression paused for a moment, but she only pretended not to know. Pulling on her hand, she said, fortunately, you two siblings are blessed with good fortune. Ever since you returned to the Fu, your fortunes have been pretty good. Presumably, the ancestors of the Jiang Fu have long ago blessed you too. Jiang Wan paused in her steps and looked towards the old Jiang madam, who was slowly collapsing. The old Jiang madam's face was a pale, deathly gray, and the corners of her mouth were bruised. The blood that flowed out was clearly black. In a panic, Kai Ke placed her finger under the old Jiang madam's nose. Her face suddenly turned deathly white and she shouted, murder, murder. Fourth younger sister, be careful of the words that cause trouble. Jiang Wan reminded her, this Junju, as a Junju, can't be compared to an inferior servant girl. From beginning to end, it seems that only Kai Ke has claimed that this Junju harms Zumo. Fourth younger sister, as this Junju's younger concubine sister, does not believe your own elder sister, but instead believe a servant girl? Isn't sisterly affection too cold? Tianzhu was also strange. She was used to killing people, but was not used to the twists and turns of the mansion. However, Lian Qiao and Bai Ji were somewhat suspicious. Lian Qiao said, Miss, you must be more careful these few days. Second Yin Yang's temperament has always been brash. Now that she has suddenly become so submissive, it is very strange. On this day, Du Wan was ordered by the old Jiang madam to invite Jiang Ruan to Guilan Yuan. These few days, the old Jiang madam always called her granddaughters to the house. Since the old Jiang madam had come to invite them, there was no reason to refuse. Jiang Ruan brought Lian Xiao and Bai Ji over. On the way, she happened to meet Jiang Dan, who was walking back. Jiang Ruan had only stayed in the Jiang Fu for a few days, but this morning, she saw Second Yin Yang for the first time. Jiang Ruan looked down. The gaze that Second Yin Yang looked at her with was not one of annoyance. Jiang Ruan could not be more familiar with that kind of gaze. The sudden appearance of two secret guards in the room gave the servant girls a fright. Jiang Ruan knew that ever since Xiao Xiao had sent these two people had been hiding in the shadows to protect her. She said, Tian Zhu is a member of the Fu, and it is not convenient for her to go out. Go to the doctor's Fu, there is a matter that I would like to ask for your help with. She wanted to see what Second Yin Yang wanted to do. Does fourth younger sister not understand? Jiang Ruan said indifferently, Zumu has been plotted against. I think that even in death, she will not be able to rest in peace. Jiang Ruan hung her head, and after a moment, she raised it up and smiled. What does Zumu want me to do? The old Jiang madam fixed her gaze on Jiang Ruan and said, Wan girl, even now, do you still blame the Jiang family? Fourth younger sister, Jiang Ruan said indifferently. The corners of Jiang Ruan's lips curled up slightly. The meaning behind these words was that the good fortune that they and their sister had now was originally bestowed by the Jiang family. Yin Yang, please conduct yourself with dignity, Lian Xiao said angrily. Do you know what is the crime of slandering the current Junju? Jiang Dan was at a loss for words, and could not find a reply. She only heard a cold male voice cut in, this official is carrying out an errand. Guards, arrest the eldest daughter of the Jiang family who plotted against the Di ancestor. Lu Zhu was now Jiang Ruan's personal servant girl, and the servants in the Fu all knew that Jiang Ruan valued her. Moreover, Jiang Ruan's status was also that of Hong and Junju, so the servants in the Fu treated Lu Zhu much more politely than in the past. Lu Zhu quickly inquired about the news and came back. It turned out that Jiang Dan had met Second Yin Yang once. These past few days, Second Yin Yang had been extremely careful and polite in the Fu. She was even more respectful towards Jiang Quan, and was also generous towards the servants. Although Second Yin Yang's paternal family was wealthy, Second Yin Yang was after all a concubine's daughter. Normally, she was as short-sighted as Jiang Li, and would not bear to reward the servants like this. However, these past few days, she had been generous in her rewards. When Lu Zhu finished speaking, she anxiously asked, Miss, what exactly does Second Yin Yang mean by this? Perhaps she felt that Jiang Ruan's smile was too sarcastic, and in the eyes of the old Jiang madam, it was exceptionally glaring. She suddenly slammed the table, get lost. Kai Ke jumped in fright and hurriedly came over to comfort her, old madam, don't be angry. Take care of yourself. Jiang Ruan laughed softly, and her gaze was somewhat strange, as expected. When the old Jiang madam met her pair of lustrous and smiling eyes, she only felt as if she was in a cold and gloomy cellar, and her whole body could not help but tremble. Bai Ji and Lian Xiao's expressions changed, and they spoke in unison, what nonsense are you talking about? Miss is standing here well, what does it have to do with Miss? Aren't you slandering us? Second Yin Yang paused slightly, and continued to speak in a loud voice, what? Can the current Junju kill people as she pleases? Why don't you kill this concubine as well? Is there still any law in this world? Because of Jiang Li's death, the Jiang Fu was shrouded in a layer of shadow. The formerly bustling and flourishing Langzhong Fu was now clearly on the verge of collapse. Jiang Quan's official career had been smooth sailing for the past few years, but now he had become increasingly unlucky, and even his relationship with the Xiahou Fu had become estranged. His children were even more of a headache. The only two outstanding ones were originally the least favored members of the Fu. Ever since Jiang Li's death had caused a ruckus at the Langzhong Fu, second Yinyang had been confined by Jiang Quan. Now that she had been suddenly released, everyone was somewhat surprised. What was even more surprising was that when second Yinyang came out again, it was as if she had changed into a different person. She was submissive and cautious, and there was no trace of her former domineering appearance. It would be more accurate to say that she was the eldest Yinyang. The servants in the Fu began to discuss that second Yinyang must have known that Jiang Li was now dead, and that she could only live cautiously in the Jiang Fu. Today was different from the past. The originally well-known, gentle and virtuous Xia Yan, domineering, beautiful and unkind second Yinyang, had all lost their power. At present, the person in charge of the Fu was the fifth Yinyang, Hong Ying, who had come from a brothel. Now that Hong Ying was pregnant, it was feared that the Jiang Fu was about to undergo a great change. Her voice was extremely loud, and almost all the servants in the Fu were alarmed and rushed over. Jiang Su Su and Jiang Dan hurriedly rushed over, while Hong Ying was a little further away. With a big belly, she was supported by someone. Along the way, a servant girl must have informed Hong Ying of this matter. As soon as she saw Jiang Ruan, she looked at her with a complicated gaze. Old Jiang Madam looked at Jiang Ruan, her eyes wide open. Suddenly, her body stiffened, and a trace of blood slowly flowed out from the corner of her mouth. Kai Kei jumped in fright and hurriedly patted old Jiang Madam lightly. "Old Madam, what's wrong?" In her previous life, old Jiang Madam had not been able to survive this year's winter. Calculating it, it was probably after she had entered the palace, when autumn had just entered, that she had been bedridden and had become increasingly thin. Around the end of the year, she had flown a crane to the west. Now, only a few months had passed. "Oh my God. Eldest young miss, you actually plotted to murder old madam?" Chapter 130. Less nonsense. The leading official was an unfamiliar face, and when he saw Jiang Ruan, he was very arrogant. With a wave of his hand, two yamen runners stepped forward to detain Jiang Ruan. At this moment, Jiang Quan was not in the Fu, so the only one who could make decisions was Hong Ying. Hong Ying looked at the official awkwardly. "Official, this matter has not been clarified." "Clarified?" The official looked at Hong Ying in a strange manner. "Someone has accused the Jiang family's daughter of framing her biological grandmother. Now that the witness and material evidence are present, if you have anything to say, say it in prison." He looked at Jiang Ruan and smiled. "Miss Jiang, I am sorry. Official is so dedicated, it is really touching." Jiang Ruan smiled slightly. "But where is the official document?" The official seemed to have long known that Jiang Ruan would ask such a question. He smiled proudly and took out the arrest warrant document from his bosom, waving it in front of Jiang Ruan. It was written in black and white with the official seal. "Eldest Jiang miss, do you see it clearly now?" Jiang Ruan's gaze lightly swept over second Yinyang and Jiang Dan, and she said indifferently, "I see it clearly." "In that case, please." "Miss." Lian Xiao and Bai Ji hurriedly said. Jiang Ruan said, "You two stay." A pleased look flashed in second Yinyang's eyes. Jiang Dan seemed to be somewhat absent-minded from the scene in front of her, and only hid behind second Yinyang, refusing to speak. Jiang Su Su only pretended to be sad. Kai Kei and Du Wan guarded old Jiang Madam's corpse, carefully wiping the bloodstains on old Jiang Madam's lips. The calmest person in the room seemed to be Jiang Ruan. She looked at the two officers behind her and indifferently said, "I can walk on my own, no need to be so polite." The matter of Jiang Ruan conspiring to murder old Jiang Madam and being arrested by the officials set off a huge wave in the Fu. Ruan Ju, Jean Eyre and Jean San looked solemn. Jean San said, "I will go with you to the prison to guard Miss Jiang." "You go look for master." Jean Eyre nodded and was about to go down when he saw Lu Zhu hurriedly run into the courtyard. She looked around and seemed to be somewhat at a loss. In a small voice, she called out, Jean Eyre? Jean Eyre's footsteps paused. He flew down from the tree and stopped in front of Dewdrop. What is it? At this moment, Lu Zhu did not care about Jean Eyre's mysterious appearance and only took out a letter from her bosom and handed it to Jean Eyre. Miss instructed me to deliver this letter to His Highness. Jean Eyre put the letter away and nodded. All right, I understand. Just as he was about to leave, Dewdrop stopped him. Hey! Jean Eyre turned around and Lu Zhu looked at him hesitantly. Everything that happened before was my fault. This time, Miss has been framed. Please protect Miss this time. Jean Eyre was slightly surprised. Jiang Wan was completely unaware of this, but Xiao Xiao's brocade guards must have already investigated the ins and outs of the matter. She simply and generously said, Second Yin Yang was provoked by fourth sister, and originally wanted to deal with me in this way. The Minister of Appointments is not to be feared, but the troublesome one is the head of the Imperial Censorate. Hu Qianqiu had been an official in the Imperial Court for many years, and he was very attentive from top to bottom. The Emperor was also very fond of this loyal official. In her previous life, she was clear about matters related to the Jiang family, but this Hu Qianqiu had never come into contact with this. In fact, Hu Qianqiu belonged to the Fifth Prince's faction, and originally had nothing to do with Xianli. Unexpectedly, he was a sentimental person, and was willing to take such a risk for Second Yin Yang. Leave this matter to me. Xiao Xiao said, there is no need to worry. Jiang Wan was slightly sluggish, and she looked towards Xiao Xiao. Xiao Xiao was looking at her, and his gaze was filled with undisguised concern. She said, all right. He could feel that Jiang Ruan's attitude was slowly changing, from the initial estrangement to a gradual trust. Perhaps Jiang Ruan herself had not noticed this detail. Xiao Xiao's mood inexplicably improved a little. He looked around and said, tonight, you hold on, tomorrow I will take you out. Jiang Ruan muttered to herself, you also be careful. A trace of a smile flashed in Xiao Xiao's eyes. He thought for a moment, and then squatted down in front of her. From his bosom, he took out a very small whistle-like object and handed it to Jiang Ruan. The brocade guards are lying in ambush everywhere. If there is any danger, use this whistle, and the nearby brocade guards will be able to rush over. Presumably, it was his personal keepsake. Before Jiang Ruan could speak, Xiao Xiao had already stood up and ordered the brocade guards to clean up the corpses on the ground. Jiang Ruan put the whistle back into her sleeve, and her eyes darkened as she sank into deep thought. In the General Fu. Zhao Guang had just left court when he found out about this matter, and he almost went straight to the minister's Fu. With great difficulty, he was persuaded by everyone. Madame Li anxiously wiped away her tears. Wan is fine, why would he be locked up? I don't believe that he conspired to harm the old Jiang madam. He must have been slandered. The men of the Zhao family were all incomparably brave, but the women of the Zhao family were all beautiful and delicate. When Madame Li wiped away her tears, Zhao Guang became anxious. Zhao Yuanping consoled, Mother, don't be anxious, third younger brother has already gone to the prison to see what exactly happened. Those people of the Jiang family, even if they had to die, they should have brought Wan and Xing back. Madame Li was full of regret, they are a pack of jackals and wolves. No, how can I be at ease with Wan being raised in that Fu? Zhao Yulong whispered, that also depends on whether she is willing to come back. Yulong. Zhao Yuanping gave his son a warning look, and Zhao Yulong kept quiet. Regarding his own cousin, Zhao Yulong only had the impression that she had very weak feelings for the Zhao family. Zhao Yulong pursed his lips. His grandfather and grandmother's families still felt sorry for him. Zhao Feizhou looked at Zhao Yuanping and asked, Second uncle, when will Sister Wan be released? Zhao Guang also glared at Zhao Yuanping. Zhao Yuanping said helplessly, we have to figure out what happened first. With third brother around, he would be able to take care of things in prison. However, it is a little strange that the censorate would send out the official documents so quickly. Rubbing his chin, he said in a low voice, Father, make a trip to the palace and first look for the emperor. For the time being, the emperor will not touch Ruan, for the sake of our family. Eldest brother and I will go meet the director of the imperial censorate. Nephew Da, transfer a few people from the guards to go to the Jiang Fu's entrance and make some inquiries. Ruan, must have offended someone for no reason. Mother and the sisters-in-law will stay in the mansion and wait for news. If there are any problems, we will be able to deal with them. Peace returned to the general's mansion after the arrangements were made. Xiao Xiao walked out of the prison door, leaving behind a few secret guards to deal with the corpses in the prison. Just as he descended the stairs, his footsteps suddenly stopped and his eyes flashed with coldness. The sound of footsteps came from the left. Zhao Yuanfeng looked up and down at Xiao Xiao as he walked. In a mocking tone, he said, Xiao Wangye's movements are very fast. Xiao Xiao glanced at him and continued to walk forward. Zhao Yuanfeng stretched out his hand to stop him. Although Zhao Yuanfeng was older than Xiao Xiao, in front of this young man who commanded hundreds of thousands of genie guards at such a young age, he still felt some pressure. In his heart, he was unhappy with Xiao Xiao's attitude. Zhao Yuanfeng had always been a lawless person, so he immediately said, Xiao Wangye is a bit too close to Ruan, Xiao Xiao stopped walking. What can you do? Zhao Yuanfeng almost fainted from Xiao Xiao's impolite words. No matter what, he was still the third son of the Zhao family. He was also a dignified young general. But now, Xiao Xiao's words made it seem like he was very incompetent. Xiao Xiao fished out a letter from his bosom and tossed it to him. Zhao Yuanfeng caught it. Ignoring Xiao Xiao's rudeness, he skimmed through the letter 10 lines at a glance. Zhao Yuanfeng's expression changed several times. He asked, You want to hand it over to the censor? Chapter 131. The shock that the old Jiang madam's death brought to the Jiang Fu could not be said to be small. Rather than saying that the news of the old Jiang madam's death was too shocking, it would be better to say that Jiang Ruan's imprisonment was even more shocking. When Jiang Quan found out about this matter, he was naturally enraged beyond compare. That day in Guilan Yuan, only Kai Ke was left in front of the old Jiang madam. Kai Ke had followed the old Jiang madam for many years and her words were naturally convincing. As for the old Jiang madam's tea, it was discovered that it had been laced with arsenic. The rumor going around in the streets and alleys was that Jiang Ruan had a deep grudge against the old Jiang madam, so she had poisoned arsenic and fed it to the old Jiang madam. Although these words traveled far, a smart person would be able to pick up on the clues. If one wanted to murder someone, throwing arsenic in front of their face was a little too stupid. Princess Hong An was not a fool. Why would she seek her own death? However, suspicions were just suspicions. After all, this was a matter of the Jiang Fu. While everyone was talking about it, they were also waiting to see how the younger sister of the war god of the great Jin dynasty, the favored daughter of Empress Dowager Ida, was going to reverse the situation. Perhaps it was because the rumors outside were too ferocious that Jiang Quan issued a restriction order. Apart from purchasing goods, no one in the Fu was allowed to come out and walk around. In Second Yin Yang's courtyard, Yang Lu was carefully helping Second Yin Yang drink the medicine. Take it further away. The second aunt waved her hand and pushed the bowl of medicine away. Her face showed a bit of annoyance. Jiang Quan did not allow the people in the Fu to go out, and outsiders were also not allowed to enter. Even the servants who were supposed to pass on the news did not receive any news, let alone know what the situation outside was like. Thinking of the 30,000 taels of silver that she had given away, the second Yin Yang gritted her teeth. She had staked all of her family's wealth on this. Even if Jiang Ruan grew wings, it would be difficult for her to escape. Although Hu Qianqiu had asked for her help, many years had passed since then. On the surface, Hu Qianqiu had helped him because of their past friendship, but in reality, he had wanted to secretly build a connection with the Jiang family. The battle between Xianhua and Xianli became more and more intense. Even though Hu Qianqiu was on Xianhua's side, he couldn't help but feel a little hesitant. If he could establish a connection with the Jiang Fu, then in the future, if anything were to happen, he would be able to take care of them. Li Cheng, on the other hand, was her nephew. He was a gambler and owed a lot of debt. If she hadn't seen through this, she wouldn't have let Li Cheng help her. Even if it was because of Jiang Xing's name, the emperor would still protect Hong and Junzhu. However, Hu Qianqiu did not know what had happened, but he had imprisoned Hong and Junzhu. He did not think that if something had happened and angered the god of war, Jiang Xing, then his official career would have come to an end. Ku Xiuran naturally rejoiced in Hu Qianqiu's misfortune. He thought that Hong and Junzhu was really not a bystander. Even Jining Wang had to stand up for her. Suddenly, he thought of something and hurriedly stood up. Even if it was for Jining Wang's sake, he absolutely could not neglect this Hong and Junzhu. Right now, it was better to inform the officials. It was not known elsewhere in the capital, but the atmosphere in the Jiang Fu was very heavy. Old Jiang Madam's coffin was placed in the newly set-up mourning hall. Everyone in the Fu was dressed in mourning clothes, and the people guarding the mourning hall at night were Du Wan and Kai Quebec. After old Jiang Madam's death, the two servant girls had no place to go. Considering that they had followed the old madam for so many years and had worked hard, it was still customary to let them out of the Fu. Du Wan and Kai Ke were now in their 20s and 17 years of age, and were still unmarried. Du Wan was the child of a family, and her father and mother were still working at the Jiang Fu's farmstead. If they were let out of the Fu, they would still have a place to live. Kai Ke, on the other hand, had been bought by the old Jiang madam from outside, and she had always been alone. At night, the mourning hall was even more deserted. The old Jiang madam's coffin emitted a faint and gloomy color. A gust of wind blew through the mourning hall, causing the originally weak white candles to sway as if they were on the verge of collapsing. The unburnt paper money in the basin swayed and floated up, as if an invisible hand was playing with the paper money. Siyu's men had long since left, and the Jiang Fu was increasingly deserted, as if there were only the two of them in the huge mansion. Du Wan got up and went to the latrine, but did not return for a long time, leaving Kai Ke alone. The white paper lantern swayed on the rafters, sprinkling a mottled black shadow, and for no reason at all, it was somewhat horrifying. Kai Ke's heart tightened, and she could not help but reach out to hug her own arms. She did not know when the moonlight outside the window had already disappeared, and it seemed like there was only a faint light in the mourning hall. Now that the chilly wind blew, this faint light also seemed to be extinguished. Suddenly, the coffin emitted a crisp sound. That sound was very strange, as if someone was scratching a wooden board with their fingernails. Kai Ke's body stiffened, and a gust of cold air covered her head and face, drenching her body to the core. Their relationship was very deep, but she had just been held hostage by this stranger, and could only watch helplessly as Kai Ke was frightened to this extent. And from then on, she had become a fool. What good ending could a servant girl who had become a fool have? Don't just worry about her. Jean San chuckled, do you also want to become a fool like her? I wonder if Sir Wang would still like such a beautiful girl like you to become a fool. Du Wan was startled, and immediately felt a chill run down her spine. Sir Wang, how did she know about Sir Wang? She knew better than anyone how the old Jiang madam had died. While she was shocked by Kai Ke's boldness, she had also received a bargaining chip from that person. That person said that as long as she could testify, he would help her escape from her slavery status. Du Wan had followed by the old Jiang madam's side, and had originally planned to remain unmarried for the rest of her life. However, she had not expected to meet Sir Wang. No matter what, a servant did not have the qualifications to marry Sir Wang as his official wife. If she could escape from her slavery status, wouldn't she be able to fly together with Sir Wang and become a pair of companions? Therefore, Duan fell silent and agreed. Only when he saw that Jiang Wan was safe and sound did he nod his head in satisfaction. As expected, he is very considerate. Jiang Wan said in a low voice, "Little maternal uncle." Zhao Yuanfeng looked at her with a smile and waved her hand. "Wan girl, since you came out today, I'll take you to see a good show." Jiang Wan smiled, "All right." Early in the morning, when the servants of the Jiang Fu had risen early to tidy up and clean up, they heard a heavy pounding on the main entrance of the Jiang Fu. The manservant who was guarding the door opened it and saw a group of officials carrying sabers walking in a line. They looked fierce and fiendish. The older woman hurriedly came forward and said, "Sir, why did you?" However, the officer rudely waved the old woman aside and said, "Get out of my way. I am here to arrest a criminal of the imperial court." The old woman quivered in fright. In this Fu, other than Jiang Chao and Jiang Quan, there was no one else who was an official, so how could he bear the 4 words court criminal? Could it be that something had happened to master? The old woman was so frightened that she kept quiet out of fear. The officers and soldiers no longer paid attention to her and entered the main entrance of the Jiang Fu without consulting anyone. Not long after, Second Yang was escorted out of the courtyard. "Sir, you've been wrongly accused." This concubine did not do anything. Second Yang still did not understand what had happened. Instead, before she heard news of Jiang Ruan's mishap, a group of officers and soldiers arrived. The leader of the officers and soldiers was not Li Chang. He glared at her fiercely and said, "Shut up. If you have anything to say, then come with us to the Yamen." That officer was truly ferocious. Second Yang was so frightened that she did not dare to speak again. When Jiang Quan heard the news, he hurriedly brought some people out to investigate. When he saw the leader of the officers, he frowned and asked, "May I ask what crime this lowly concubine has committed?" Originally, with Jiang Quan's rank, when these officers saw him, even if they did not fawn over him, they would still treat him with respect. Today, however, it was different. The leader of the officers and soldiers glanced at Jiang Quan and said in a meaningful tone, "Jiang Darren, it is best that you do not interfere in this matter. Be careful not to invite trouble upon yourself." Finished speaking, he called out to his subordinates and left without looking back. Jiang Quan's heart turned cold. That officer's tone had a profound meaning. He had taken Second Yang away, yet he made it sound so serious. What did he mean by inviting trouble upon himself? Moreover, bringing so many people to arrest Second Yang, wasn't this making a big fuss over a minor issue? He was also a person who had been in the officialdom for so many years. Immediately, a conjecture emerged in his mind. Could it be that there was a problem with the Minister of Appointments? Back to Second Yang, she followed the officers and soldiers all the way to the Yamen. 2 officers and soldiers were left behind to watch over her, while the leader of the officers and his subordinates entered first. Second Yang's heart was in turmoil. After thinking for a while, she hardened her heart and plucked out 2 jade rings from her fingers. A few days ago, in order to bribe Li Chang, she had already sold off all her jewelry. This jade ring was given to her by Jiang Quan when he first brought her into the Fu, and she could not bear to pawn it off. Now that the situation was urgent, she could not care too much. Grabbing the 2 jade rings, she stuffed them into the hands of the 2 officers and smiled apologetically, "Officers, may I ask why you want to arrest me?" The jade ring was of excellent quality. If it was taken out to be pawned, it could be sold for 1,000 or 800 taels. Normally, it was rare for these Yamen runners to see such goods and would naturally have a tacit understanding. However, today, this trick did not work. The two yamen runners looked at each other and did not stretch out their hands to receive the jade rings. Seeing this, Second Inyang's heart sank. She was not afraid of asking for things, but she was afraid of not accepting what she had given. Had the matter already reached such a serious point? What could have happened that even two yamen runners did not dare to accept things? Second Inyang's expression changed and she smiled. Officers, that. Do you know where your Li Chang, Li Daren, has gone? One of the yamen runners looked at her in surprise. Li Daren. Yesterday, there was not even a shadow of him, and there was no one in the Fu. The higher-ups have changed people. Even if they returned, it would not be his turn. After thinking for a while, he looked at Second Inyang and said, don't play any tricks, save your strength for the court. Why are you talking nonsense with her? The other yamen runner impatiently urged. Second Inyang was even more alarmed. She did not know how long she had waited, but she heard someone beating the drum of clear injustice outside. Each beat seemed to strike at the heart of the people. The drum of clear injustice would only be beaten when there was a major case. Usually, it would implicate court officials. When the drum stopped beating, Second Inyang was brought to the court. 2 rows of yamen runners stood on either side. The great master at the top was not the one that Second Inyang was familiar with. He had a very unapproachable appearance. What shocked Second Inyang the most was not this. To the left of the middle seat, sat a figure that she was very familiar with. Jiang Ruan's makeup was clean and neat, and she had changed into a light green dress. She was still as gorgeous and charming as before. At this moment, she looked at Second Inyang with a smile that was not a smile. Second Inyang's heart sank. She hated that Jiang Ruan had escaped a calamity again. She was very unreconciled, and her gaze towards Jiang Ruan was like a sharp sword dipped in poison. When Second Inyang's appearance fell into the eyes of the others in the court, they were somewhat displeased. Zhao Yuanfeng coughed lightly. I see that this sinful woman has not yet figured out her own identity. Kudaran. Kuxiu Ran, who was sitting in the main seat, quivered and looked at Zhao Yuanfeng. Everyone knew that this Zhao family's third master had an arrogant and unruly temperament. However, the Zhao family had 3 generations of military generals and was still quite capable. Offending him would cause many difficulties in the court in the future. Besides, today, Zhao Yuanfeng had personally come to observe the case. Wasn't it to support Heng and Junju? It would be better to do him a favor, and it would be easier to handle matters in the future. Thinking of this, Kuxiu Ran slammed the gavel and shouted, Sinful woman, do you know your crime? Second Inyang shook her head and was panic-stricken. This lowly concubine does not know what crime I have committed. Kuxiu Ran said, bring the witness. An official escorted 2 servant girls forward. One of them had disheveled hair and muttered, this servant is wrong. Old Furen, this servant did not intentionally harm you. It was Second Inyang who made this servant do so. Old Furen, this servant is wrong. She was already delirious. It was Kai Quebec. The other person knelt down and said in a clear voice, replying to Darren's words, this servant is Du Wan. This servant can testify that it was Second Inyang who bribed Kai K to drug Old Furen in order to slander Junju. Second Inyang also threatened this servant that if this servant spoke the truth, she would kill this servant's entire family in the rural residence. Nonsense, when did I? Second Inyang said unwillingly. Second Inyang gave Kai K a large sum of money. If Darren does not believe, you can go and check Kai K's room. There is no need. This official has already checked. Kuxiu Ran waved his hand. The official at the side then said, Jiang Li Shi, you killed for money and poisoned Jiang Shi to death. You did not repent and conspired to frame Heng and Junju. In order to silence her, you hired assassins to kill her. Your heart is evil and does not hunger for snakes or scorpions. You are vicious like a jackal and wolf. If this can be tolerated, what can it be? Even the heavens are clear. How can this residence tolerate you? The law states that the murderer must die. Today, you are sentenced to be beheaded. Once the words beheaded were said, Second Yang was like a piece of cork that had lost its backbone. She could no longer support herself and collapsed softly. She was originally a cowardly and vicious person and did not even have the strength to defend herself. There was only one thing on her mind, and that was that the matter had been exposed. But when she thought that her father was the Minister of Appointments and might have a way to save her, her eyes lit up and she cried, "This lowly concubine is wronged. This lowly concubine is wronged. Master, please let this lowly concubine see father." Jiang Wan smiled slightly. Second Yang wholeheartedly wanted to rely on her maiden family and perhaps even wanted Hu Qianqiu's help. However, the Li family was having difficulty protecting themselves. As for Hu Qianqiu, it was likely that there would no longer be such a person in the imperial censorate in the future. Kuxiu Ran slammed the gavel again. His eyes flashed with a trace of deep meaning as he shouted, "Bring in the sinner Li Dexing." Second Yang felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She saw the officers and soldiers escorting a few people with shackles on their hands and dressed in prisoner's uniform. They were none other than Second Yang's father, Minister Li, and his brother. Minister Li cut a sorry figure from head to toe. It was obvious that he had suffered a lot. When he saw Second Yang, he fiercely spat at her and scolded, "Scourge." Second Yang was stunned. "Father, this is, get lost." Minister Li was extremely irritable. "Silence." Kuxiu Ran slammed the gavel with a very serious expression. Minister Li clenched his teeth. If it was in the past, would Kuxiu Ran dare to treat him like this? This morning, early in the morning, the officials were ordered to search the minister's residence. He was initially in disbelief, but the information that the officials revealed actually shocked him. Everything that had happened in the past had been dug up. Even the business that he had thought was flawless had been dug up by others. If it was anything else, it would be fine. However, forming a faction with the court officials was a taboo of the emperor. Minister Li's life could be considered as smooth sailing. He did not expect that he would be plotted against today. There were some things that he himself did not remember clearly, but they were dug out by others. His confession in prison was listed out one by one. Minister Li almost suspected that his trusted aide had betrayed him. The charges even implicated Hu Qianqiu. It was said that Hu Qianqiu had accepted money from Second Yang and that Second Yang had obstructed official duties. At that time, Minister Li felt that it was strange. It was fine if it was the other charges, but how did Second Yang's matter get mixed in? The jailer had some friendship with him in the past. He kindly reminded, "Minister Li, if you want to blame someone, blame your daughter." Of all people, she had to provoke Hong and Junzhu. The person behind Hong and Junzhu is not someone that the Minister Fu can afford to offend. Moreover, she was only a concubine, so she naturally did not have the qualifications nor the mind to worry about her marriage. Originally, when the old Jiang madam was still around, perhaps she would consider it for her. Now that the old Jiang madam had left, no one in the Fu would pay attention to whether she could be betrothed to someone else smoothly. Even Jiang Quan would only consider her marriage as an exchange gift. From this, it seemed that observing mourning for a daughter was not necessarily a bad thing. Lu Zhu pushed open the door and walked in. "Today at noon, the Second Yang will be beheaded at the entrance of the food market, Miss." Lu Zhu hesitated for a moment before asking, "Do you want to go?" Bai Ji frowned. "That kind of filthy scene will not dirty Mrs. eyes. Let's go and take a look." Jiang Wan said, "In any case, we have some friendship, so it is only right to send her on her way." The friendship of 2 lifetimes was not shallow. The entrance of the food market was crowded with onlookers. The clothes of the woman who was tied up and kneeling on the ground were already extremely dirty, and her hair was covered with stains and rotten vegetable leaves. There would always be people who were filled with righteous indignation to express their anger towards the prisoner. Pei, shameless, actually colluding with the adulterer to harm the Junju. Exactly, she is not a good family's daughter. Didn't you see that even the minister's fu was confiscated? She reaped what she sowed. Sure enough, the kind of person raises the kind of daughter they raise. Perhaps that shameless doctor's wife from a few days ago was led astray like this. Amidst the heated discussion, the woman dressed in prisoner's clothes raised her head, revealing a mottled face. One could vaguely see her former beauty, but her gaze was extremely lax. Her lips were curved in a silly smile, and her face was covered with drool. She spoke to herself in a low voice, and only the nearest executioner could clearly hear her words. She was saying, Mother will take you out to buy clothes. The executioner's mouth twitched in disdain, and his gaze towards her was full of contempt. In the crowd at the entrance of the food market, Lu Zhu and Tian Zhu protected Jiang Yuan from being squeezed by the crowd. Jiang Yuan lifted the curtain hat and looked at the woman who was muttering to herself. Second Yinyang's silly appearance was no longer a shadow of her former shrewdness and beauty. Although Second Yinyang had never been shrewd, in her previous life, she had envied Jiang Li because Jiang Li had such a strong mother. A concubine's daughter lived more comfortably than a Di's daughter. When Jiang Yuan was young, Zhao Mei was still the mistress of the household in the Jiangfu, but she did not live up to the title of mistress. Zhao Mei was gentle, and usually, she was attentive and would not give others anything to use against her. Perhaps feeling that it was somewhat wrong for a concubine from a brothel to be in charge of the household, Jiang Quan, for the first time, instructed eldest Yinyang to help Hong Ying manage the affairs of the Fu. Eldest Yinyang was almost an invisible person in the Fu, and did not pose any threat to Hong Ying. Usually, she was not even as good as a servant girl, so Hong Ying naturally did not pay any attention to her. All the daughters of the Jiang Fu had to observe mourning for the old Jiang madam, but Jiang Dan was an exception. Because the portrait of the consort selection had been sent, there had been a reply in the past few days. Someone from the palace had come, and Jiang Dan had been selected to enter the palace with the other beauties to display their talents. Whether or not she would be able to stay in the palace was still unknown. However, Jiang Quan was obviously very concerned about this matter. In reality, the emperor had not chosen Jiang Dan because of her outstanding talent. In her previous life, he had chosen the daughter of the Jiang family to enter the palace only to contain the Jiang family. In her previous life, by this time, the Jiang family's power was already at its zenith. However, ever since she had returned to the capital 3 years ago, the Jiang family had been hindered in many ways, both overtly and covertly, and their power was far from what it had been in her previous life. Even so, the emperor was still wary of the Jiang Fu. Jiang Quan called Jiang Dan into his study for a full 4 hours. The servants in the Fu guessed that it was something that Jiang Quan had instructed Jiang Dan to do. Since Jiang Quan thought so highly of Jiang Dan, the servants in the Fu were happy to dream of having a consort in the Jiang Fu. As Lian Xiao brought in the peony cake that had been made in the kitchen, she said, "Master really wants to praise 4th young Mississippi. 4th young Miss can't even compare to 2nd young Miss, so how can she gain His Majesty's favor?" Lian Xiao had a straightforward temperament, and when no one was around, she spoke even more straightforwardly. She was not wrong. If one really wanted to use a daughter to enter the palace as a consort to promote the Jiang family, why not send Jiang Su Su? Jiang Su Su was born beautiful and talented. Although she was not as patient as Jiang Dan, she was more liked by men than Jiang Dan. Sending Jiang Su Su into the palace would definitely gain the emperor's favor. "Master can't bear to part with 2nd young Mississippi," Bai Ji said softly. "The palace looks like glory, splendor, wealth, and rank, but how can the hardships within be understood?" Lu Zhu curled her lips. "Master's heart is too biased, but I don't think others think so." These days, the servant girls in the Fu are all rushing to curry favor with fourth young Mississippi. No one understood Jiang Quan's intentions better than Jiang Yuan, because in her previous life, she had also been coaxed into the palace in the same way. Jiang Quan had only said that there would be people in the palace to take care of her, and that Jiang Su's health was not good. This was all for the Jiang family, and in addition, Xianli had said that he would take care of her. Thus, she had entered the depths of the palace, and in the end, even her corpse had not been left intact. Now, she had stayed out of the matter and watched coldly as Jiang Quan repeated his old tricks. Jiang Dan was not her. Jiang Dan had voluntarily entered the palace. Jiang Quan was not willing to sacrifice Jiang Su, but he did not know that Jiang Dan had the courage to sacrifice the Jiang family, as long as she could climb up. Perhaps Jiang Quan thought that he could control Jiang Dan, but he did not know that this move was like releasing a tiger back into the mountains. Jiang Dan was a poisonous snake. Once it had nourished soil, it would definitely grow rapidly, and then swallow up the Jiang Fu until not even a scrap was left. The two of them harbored ulterior motives. Jiang Quan thought that he had crossed the sea by deceiving the world, but in fact, Jiang Dan had taken advantage of the situation. Sitting on top of the mountain and watching the tigers fight, there was no end to it. Chapter 134. The days passed by peacefully, as if unaffected. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of summer, and the weather was slightly cooler than it had been previously. The complicated matters of the past slowly settled down, and the death of the old Jiang madam seemed to be gradually forgotten. In Jinying Wangfu, the snow pigeon fluttered in through the window and landed on the boxwood desk in the room. Its wings accidentally stained the ink on the inkstone, and its snow-white feathers immediately emitted a faint scent of ink. Xiao Xiao lifted the snow pigeon from the edge of the inkstone and placed it in his palm. The snow pigeon's snow-white head tilted to look at him, its black bean-like eyes sensitive and intelligent. Xiao Xiao patted the snow pigeon's head and untied the copper strip that was tied to its leg. The note in the copper strip was not long, and there was only a small line of handwriting on it. After Xiao Xiao finished reading the note, he slowly frowned. After a while, he burned the note on an oil lamp and ordered, "Prepare the horse, I want to leave the capital." "Master." Jin Yi was somewhat hesitant. "Call Yi Feng out." "There is no need to go to Yi Bao Pavilion. Go to 100 Zhang Tao and find Qi Si." Jin Yi's expression turned cold as he said, "Yes." In Ruanzhu, Tianzhu lifted the curtain and said, "Miss, the carriage is ready." Lu Zhu grabbed a small basket of snacks on the table and said with a smile, "It will be good to eat some on the way." A few days ago, they had received an invitation from Dong Furen. It was signed by Dong Yinger, but the person who had invited Jiang Yuan was Dong Furen. Ever since the old Jiang madam had passed away, in order to observe mourning, Jiang Yuan had stayed in the courtyard for a long time and had not gone out. Speaking of Dong Yinger, they had not seen her for a long time. Suddenly receiving an invitation from the Dong family, Lian Qiao and Bai Ji were somewhat surprised. Thus, they had Tianzhu prepare the carriage and went out to the Dong Fu. When they went out, they happened to run into Jiang Dan and Hong Ying talking. Hong Ying's belly was becoming more and more obvious, and it was likely that she would give birth in a few days. Now that Jiang Quan had handed over the Fu's affairs to Hong Ying, Xia Yan had not been released, and the original second Yinyang had long passed away. Hong Ying was the sole ruler of the Jiang Fu. She had the air of the mistress of the household. Dewdrop's eyes flashed. She did not know if Hong Ying was trying to please both sides. Other than Jiang Su, she was always amiable towards Jiang Dan, and the two of them had a very good relationship. On the surface, Jiang Dan did not seem to have done anything, but Lu Zhu had followed Jiang Yuan for so long that she could naturally see some tricks. That Jiang Dan was not as harmless as she appeared on the surface. By doing this, wasn't Hong Ying slapping Jiang Ruan's face? In some matters, she was even more ruthless than an assassin. In the brocade guard, Tianzhu could be considered to have seen all kinds of people, but she had never seen such a virtuous girl. Moreover, the words that Jiang Wan had said before Second Yin Yang's death were deeply imprinted in Tianzhu's heart. Jiang Wan had said that the Jiang Fu owed her a life debt, and that she would collect it back one by one. However, from the beginning to the end, the only member of her family who had died in the Jiang Fu was Zhao Mei. How could there be a life debt? Tianzhu felt that Jiang Ruan's heart was hiding a very deep secret, a secret that even the few servant girls who were very close to her were completely unaware of. She thought that perhaps she should find an opportunity to properly report these matters to the young master. In the governor's fu, Dong Ying'er was leaning on the soft couch. Rather than saying leaning, it would be better to say that she had no strength left. Her whole body was limp on the couch. Compared to the thin and sallow appearance of a few days ago, she seemed to have put on some weight these days. However, her face was filled with deep sorrow. She did not look like a carefree young girl at all. The servant girl, Hong He, stepped forward and placed a bowl of brown sugar lotus seed porridge on the couch. She respectfully said, "Miss, have some porridge." "I don't want to eat." Dong Ying'er timidly turned her head away. "Even if you don't want to eat, you still have to eat." A cold and hard voice sounded. It was the governor of the capital, Dong Darren. However, his expression was very grave and stern as he stiffly said, "Put away your unrealistic thoughts. The portrait has already been sent to the palace. In a few days, when the people from the palace arrive, you will obediently enter the palace." "Father," Dong Ying'er's voice was soft, but her tone was firm. Will never enter the palace." "Not enter the palace? Then you and your mother will go to the Chang family to apologize and enter the Chang family's door." Dong Darren said angrily. Will only marry one person in this life, and that is Great General Jiang Xing. As soon as these words came out, Dong Darren's anger was difficult to quell. He immediately raised a hand towards Dong Ying'er. Dong Ying'er fearlessly looked at him. In the end, he could not bear to do so, so Dong Darren did not strike her. He only angrily said, "Foolish. I see that you are still not sober. Lock yourself up for a few more days." After he finished speaking, he angrily flicked his sleeves and left. After Dong Darren left, Dong Ying'er seemed to have exhausted all the strength in her body. She collapsed on the soft couch and sobbed. Dong Darren had always doted on her, but now, he had locked her up in her room and placed her under house arrest. Every day, he ordered people to take good care of her with good food and drinks. She had originally thought that she had a good father and sympathized with Jiang Ruan's misfortune. But now, it seemed that her father was no different from Jiang Ruan's father. They were both ruthless. In the outer hall, Jiang Ruan got off the carriage and was welcomed in by the servants of the Dong Fu. Jiang Ruan had been to the capital governor's fu a few times, so the servants were familiar with her. When they led her into the main hall, Dong Furen was sitting on her seat in a daze. Seeing her enter, she hurriedly got up and greeted, "Junju. Furen can call me Wan Yang." Jiang Wan smiled. Dong Furen smiled apologetically and said, "Wan Yang, actually, I sent that invitation in Er's name. You don't blame me, right?" Furen must be joking, Jiang Wan smiled, but what happened to Jijie? Dong Furen's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Jiang Wan and met her gentle and smiling eyes. Those eyes seemed to have a magical power that made people feel at ease and trust. She felt slightly relieved inside. "I'm not afraid that Junju will laugh at me. This girl has never made me worry before. She's also sensible at an early age. Perhaps Wan Yang has heard that was engaged to the third young master of the Chang family in her early years, but alas, at this critical juncture, she had someone she liked. She went to talk to the third young master of the Chang family and broke off the engagement with the Chang family. Seeing that Jiang Yuan did not reveal a look of disdain, she boldly continued, even if such a thing happened in our Fu, it would not be tolerated. The Chang family is the same. After the engagement was broken off, this matter spread. Adding her's age, she was already at the age of marriage. With such a ruckus, even some families who wanted to marry Ying gave up on the idea. Seeing that Ying would be at the mercy of others in the Fu, master, in a fit of anger, had someone draw a portrait of Ying and send it to the consort selection. Ying Jijie was unwilling. Jiang Yuan asked. Of course not. Dong Furen's expression became even more worried. When Ying found out about this, she had a big fight with Master. Master has always been stubborn, and he also got mixed up with his own daughter. He locked Ying in her room and ordered the maidservants to watch her eat every day. He said that if she used her body as a threat, he would kill all the maidservants in her room. Ying had no choice. She did eat every day, but she looked more and more worried. She said to Jiang Yuan, "Good child, I know that you and Ying have a good relationship. Ying will always listen to some of your words. You should let her dispel those unrealistic thoughts and stop her from being so obsessed." Jiang Yuan smiled slightly, naturally. "Wan Yang, may I ask, who is Ying Jiejie's sweetheart?" As soon as these words came out, Dong Furen's expression changed. She lowered her head as if she could not bear it. She did not dare to look at Jiang Ruan's expression for a long time. After a moment, she squeezed out a few words with difficulty. "It's Juanzhu's eldest brother. Deputy General Jiang." The maidservant opened the curtain and Dong Ying impatiently said, "Go out, I want to be alone." "Miss, Hung and Junzhu has come to see you." The maidservant whispered and nodded to Jiang Ruan behind her. Jiang Ruan motioned for the maidservant to leave. The maidservant closed the door and left. Dong Ying was originally lying on the soft couch. When she heard the maidservant's words, she was also stunned. It seemed that she could not understand the Hung and Junzhu that the maidservant had mentioned. After a moment, she reacted and hurriedly looked over. Sure enough, she saw Jiang Yuan walking towards her. "Wan Mimi." Dong Ying stood up in shock. Ever since the old Jiang madam passed away, she should have followed the Fu to the Jiang family to offer her condolences. However, Dong Darren had locked her in the room and did not allow her to go out. Thus, she had not been able to see Jiang Yuan. Speaking of which, the two of them had not seen each other for many days. These days, Dong Ying had not seen any outsiders. Suddenly seeing Jiang Yuan made her somewhat happy. She carefully sized up Jiang Yuan. Because she was still in mourning, Jiang Yuan could not wear red clothes. She only wore a thin green robe. It was extremely simple and plain, but it added a bit of refined elegance to her that she usually did not have. She also looked very spirited and had not sunk into sorrow because of the old Jiang madam's death. "Wan Mimi, how are you? I can't leave the Fu. That day, I heard that you were arrested and thrown into prison. Did you suffer any grievances?" Dong Ying asked with concern. Jiang Yuan shook her head and her gaze paused on Dong Ying's face. Dong Ying had always appeared lively and cheerful. Dong Darren had protected her well and had always had a carefree appearance. Now, it seemed that the cheerfulness that often hung on her face had disappeared, leaving behind only a thick sorrow. Dong Ying noticed Jiang Ruan's gaze on her and lowered her head uncomfortably. She asked, "Wan Mimi, why have you come to see me?" It was not that Zhao Jinlin, Xiang Wen, Fei Fei, and the others had not come to see her, but they had all been blocked by Dong Darren on the grounds that she was ill. For Jiang Yuan to be able to obtain Dong Darren's permission to come to the Fu, there must be a reason. "Dong Furen invited me." "My mother?" Dong Ying was somewhat puzzled. "Why did she invite you over?" Jiang Yuan looked at her and did not speak. Dong Ying was silent for a moment before she said, "You already know, don't you?" "Yes." Jiang Wan said faintly, "You are going to enter the palace." "I don't want to enter the palace." Dong Ying shook her head desperately. "I don't want to be sent to the palace. Wan Mimi, save me." "Then, will you marry into the Chang family?" Jiang Wan asked. "No, I also don't want to marry into the Chang family. Third young Master Chang is a good person, I cannot lie to him." Dong Ying muttered, "I already have someone in my heart, I cannot marry someone else." She tightly pinched the silk cloth under her body. "Father wants to send me to the palace, completely disregarding my wishes. He won't listen to anything I say." Dong Darren did the right thing. Jiang Ruan's expression was calm. She was not moved by Dong Ying's words. Hearing this, Dong Ying looked at Jiang Ruan in disbelief and said, "You actually think that he is right?" "No, father only wants to use me to exchange for the Fu's glory, splendor, wealth, and rank. He just doesn't want me to ruin the reputation of the capital governor. Father has never thought about me." "Wan Mimi, don't you resent Minister Jiang for treating you like that? How can you say that father is right? What difference is there between what father is doing and what Minister Jiang is doing to you? Wan Mimi, how can you say that?" Her tone was full of resentment and stubbornness. There was no trace of her original cheerful appearance. Jiang Wan quietly looked at the woman in front of her. Time flew by. Love was a poison that made Dong Ying seem like a completely different person. Even her own father could treat her in such a manner. The capital governor, Dong Darren, and Jiang Quan were two different people. What Jiang Quan wanted was riches and honor. Even if he had to pay with his and Jiang Xing's lives, he would not hesitate. The capital governor only wanted to make his crazy daughter sober up a little. Unfortunately, his painstaking efforts were in vain. Not only did Dong Ying not sober up, but she also hated him. Dong Ying abruptly raised her head and stared fixedly at Jiang Ruan. Suddenly, she got up from the couch and threw herself at Jiang Ruan's feet. Two streams of tears flowed down her cheeks as she said, "Wan Mimi, please help me, I only have Deputy General Jiang in my heart. In this lifetime, I will never marry anyone else. Please help me persuade father. Wan Mimi, you are so intelligent, you will certainly have a way." Her hair was disheveled and her tone was humble. She lay at Jiang Ruan's feet like a blade of grass. Both her hands tightly hugged Jiang Ruan's legs. Her tearful appearance made it seem as if she really had no way out. Jiang Ruan sighed softly and bent down to pry Dong Ying's fingers away one by one. She looked at her with pity and asked, "Why should I help you?" Dong Ying stared blankly. She did not understand what she meant. Jiang Ruan's expression was gentle and her tone was also gentle. However, the words she said were completely callous. "My eldest brother has no interest in you. Whether you like him or not, what does it have to do with him?" Dong Ying was speechless. That's right, she and Jiang Xing had only met a few times in a hurry. Moreover, Jiang Xing had not revealed any special intentions towards her. She had wholeheartedly fallen in love with Jiang Xing. She did not know Jiang Xing's attitude towards her. However, because Jiang Xing had led troops to battle, she could deceive herself. Now that Jiang Wan had spoken the truth without concealing anything, Dong Ying suddenly felt embarrassed. "You are not willing to enter the palace, nor are you willing to marry into the Chang family. However, you will never be able to marry eldest brother," Jiang Wan said softly. "Why?" Dong Ying's voice carried a sobbing tone. She looked at Jiang Wan as if she was looking at a stranger. "Why?" Jiang Xing had a meteoric rise in the imperial court. In the future, he would definitely not be able to join the 8th prince's faction. However, the capital magistrate maintained a neutral attitude in the imperial court. He would neither offend the 8th prince nor the 5th prince. In the future, if Jiang Xing really married Dong Yinger, Xian Li would use the title of capital magistrate to threaten Jiang Xing. Jiang Xing would then have one more weakness and would forever be manipulated by others. If Jiang Xing really liked Dong Yinger, then all of this would naturally be nothing. Unfortunately, Jiang Xing had never shown any affection towards Dong Yinger. Because eldest brother does not like you. Jiang Ruan's words crushed Dong Yinger's last bit of delusion. She opened her mouth and said to Jiang Ruan, "Why did you? Why are you treating me like this? In this world, the only thing that cannot be forced is love." Jiang Ruan nodded. Jie liking eldest brother is Jie's business. Jie's temperament is naturally firm. She said indifferently, "It's just that I don't know when eldest brother gets married. Will Jie still have no regrets like today?" "Ruan Mimi, are you really so heartless?" Dong Yinger said with difficulty. Jiang Ruan's eyes were gorgeous and her expression was calm. She said, "Yes. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.